June 6th, 2024, American Fork, Utah, at 4:17 p.m. Emergency dispatch received a frantic call from a teenage boy at the Johnson residence, reporting that he had just returned home and found both of his parents unresponsive in their bedroom. When officers arrived, the scene they encountered was deeply unsettling inside. The master bedroom lay the lifeless bodies of 52-years-old Carolyn Johnson and her 50-years-old husband, Olin Johnson. Carolyn had suffered multiple close-range gunshot wounds, each one instantly fatal, while Olin had a single gunshot wound to the head, with a handgun resting beside his right hand. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no ransacked drawers, no struggle, and no evidence of theft. The house was immaculate, clear, tidy, untouched, as if nothing had happened at all. And yet, in that eerie stillness, a horrifying truth lingered. How could a household that seemed so loving, disciplined, and united collapse into tragedy in a single night? What happened behind those calm walls in the final hours of Olin and Carolyn's lives? And how does a family admired for its harmony end with a mystery that no one saw coming? Carolyn Johnson was born on February 29, 1972, in Provo, Utah. After high school, she stayed nearby and attended Brigham Young University, where she earned a bachelor's degree. She began teaching vocal music there, first as an assistant and eventually as a full-time instructor. Teaching soon became her passion. She later opened a private vocal studio in her home, offering one-on-one lessons to students. Alongside teaching, Carolyn remained an active performer. She sang in a women's vocal quartet, participated in musicals, and joined music projects in different U.S. cities. Her life centered around music and education. She stayed focused on her goals, avoided unnecessary distractions, and built her career with dedication and integrity. Colleagues described her as organized, genuine, and deeply committed. When she met the man who would later become her husband, she already had a solid reputation and a clear vision for the future. Olin Johnson was born on March 29, 1967, in American Fork, Utah. He grew up in a home guided by discipline and faith. From an early age, he was known for being responsible, hardworking, and independent, always willing to help his parents. At 18, Olin left for a 2-year mission in Portugal through the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. His time there helped him learn Portuguese, immerse himself in the local culture, and develop a sense of discipline, determination, and resilience. After returning to the U.S., Olin attended Brigham Young University, where he earned a degree in Portuguese and international relations. He initially taught at a missionary training center, but later transitioned into work that combined organization, safety, and education. Olin went on to design and develop training facilities for law enforcement, including sites used by the FBI Academy in Quantico. Eventually, he launched his own company focused on creating similar complexes. Known for his precision and discipline, Olin valued structure in every area of his life, at work, at home, and in his relationships. For more than 20 years, he volunteered with the Utah County Search and Rescue Team, participating in numerous missions across the region. His teammates admired his calmness, reliability, and composure under pressure. Olin and Carolyn met in the early 1990s at a small pastry counter inside a bookstore near the university where Olin worked part-time. They struck up a friendly conversation, brief but memorable. Olin asked for her phone number and called her that same evening. An ordinary moment that turned into the start of their life together. They married on April 24, 1992, in Salt Lake City, beginning a partnership that would last 32 years. Soon after marrying, they settled in American Fork, buying a spacious home worth about $1.5 million. Over time, they welcomed 6 children. Carolyn devoted herself to raising their family, emphasizing education and music. She helped nurture each child's musical talent, chose songs for performances, and faithfully attended every recital and competition. Olin encouraged their participation in sports, practiced karate with them, and joined in school and outdoor activities. Music filled their home. Someone was always singing or playing piano. Family photos lined the walls, capturing performances, vacations, and milestones. The large living room served as the heart of the household, a place for meals, conversations, and planning future adventures. The family led an active life filled with ski trips, hikes, and cross-country road trips. They traveled abroad to Europe and Australia and explored many national parks across the US. These experiences were more than vacations. They were opportunities to teach their children about the world and encourage independence. On social media, Carolyn often shares everyday moments of her family radiant smiles. Holiday gatherings, workout sessions, or cozy dinners at home. The image shows a neat and carefully tended home, with the family gathered together around the dining table. Her captions were brief, but filled with gratitude and affection. Olin appeared in fewer posts, yet always close to the family. From the outside, their life seemed almost idyllic. Neighbors saw them as a close-knit family, respectful and loving. Everything seemed solid and peaceful. But beneath that calm exterior, small cracks began to show, barely noticeable at first. Conversations became less frequent. Tense glances occasionally passed. Nothing too serious. At least at the time, by 2020, the Johnsons still seemed to live a peaceful, steady life. The older children were starting their own journeys. While the younger ones remained in school, everything was normal until one night, when everything changed. An argument broke out between Olin and Carolyn. What started as a minor disagreement quickly escalated. Screams and the sound of broken objects rang out. Their youngest son later remembered his father tossing belongings into the yard and breaking furniture. Frightened, Carolyn called for help. When police arrived, Olin was taken to the station to give a statement, and Carolyn followed soon after. Not long afterward, she withdrew her complaint, calling it a misunderstanding. The incident was not further processed and was considered a family dispute. With no signs of physical violence, once home, Olin and Carolyn avoided the subject, both with each other and with their family and friends. They told everyone it had been just a miscommunication, and life seemed to return to normal. Outwardly, things calmed down quickly, but that night left an invisible fracture. There were no more loud arguments, but the tension lingered. Their son later said that after that night, his father withdrew further. Olin still kept up daily routines and cared for the family, but something had changed. He spoke less, spent more time alone, and seemed detached, more like a bystander in his own home. Signs of exhaustion re-emerged, symptoms that had troubled him years earlier. Before that confrontation, doctors had once described his condition as mild depression caused by work, stress, and overexertion. Medication had helped for a while, and he improved. But by 2020, as family tension grew and work pressures increased, those symptoms returned quietly. Olin stopped talking about his feelings and immersed himself in projects, working long hours and often skipping meals. Carolyn didn't openly express her concern, but friends noticed she began taking on more of the household responsibilities. She focused on the younger children and managed daily tasks on her own, hoping things would get better as before. But Olin continued to withdraw. He wasn't angry or harsh, just distant. He rarely shared his thoughts, sometimes falling silent mid-conversation and retreating to his office. There were no signs of aggression, but the openness that once defined him was gone. The year 2021 passed quietly, without incident. There were no more police calls, and neighbors had no complaints. From the outside, it looked as though life at the Johnson household had returned to normal. Carolyn resumed posting family photos, birthdays, recitals, holiday dinners, showing no sign that anything might be wrong beneath the surface. By 2024, the Johnsons appeared stable and happy. Their older children had moved out, while the younger ones remained at home. Carolyn continued teaching, and Olin managed his business while volunteering in the community. They traveled and stayed connected with friends, seemingly thriving, but something began to shift again. Olin started sleeping less, spending long nights at his computer. Sometimes he'd leave the house late without saying where he was going. His family assumed it was work. He never complained, but the fatigue was obvious. Colleagues later said he had grown noticeably quieter in those final months. Olin avoided small talk, especially about personal matters. Their home remained neat and furnished with the usual amenities. But the atmosphere had changed. The couple no longer argued, yet they didn't really talk either. Their conversations turned polite and distant, more like formal exchanges than real communication. At the time, no one thought much of it. It seemed unusual, but not alarming. No one realized that the silence was the calm before the storm. On June 10, 2024, an emergency call came in from American Fork. A teenage boy, clearly shaken, reported that he had just come home to find both his parents unresponsive. He gave his name, the address, and explained that he hadn't heard any noises or seen signs of a break-in. Officers were sent immediately. The Johnson home was in a quiet, upscale neighborhood where such events were unheard of. The front door was unlocked, and there were no signs of forced entry. The young man met the police at the door and silently led them to the master bedroom. There, they found Carolyn and Olin Johnson. It was immediately clear that both were deceased. Carolyn had several gunshot wounds to her chest and one to the head, all fired from very close range. Just a few feet away, Olin had a single gunshot wound to the temple. A handgun lay beside his right hand on the bed. Blood evidence and gunpowder traces covered the bedding and the floor. The gun was registered to Olin, and the bullets recovered at the scene matched the type of bullets used in this weapon. Only his fingerprints were found on the butt of the gun. Traces of gunpowder were also found on his palms, but Carolyn's were not. Ruling out her involvement in the shooting, there were no signs of a struggle, no defensive wounds or bruises on her body. Inside the home, everything remained untouched. Valuables, electronics, and documents were all in their usual places, with no signs of forced entry or theft. Investigators focused on the blood spatter found near the living room floor, which matched Carolyn's DNA. This suggested that the first shots were fired downstairs and that her body was later carried to the bedroom. From this, investigators concluded that Olin had shot his wife, moved her to the bed, and then taken his own life. The medical examiner's report supported this sequence, estimating no more than 20 minutes between their deaths. Shortly after, the property was fully secured. Forensic teams documented the scene, collected evidence, removed the firearm, shell casings, and fabric samples. With all doors and windows locked from the inside and the alarm turned off, police ruled out any third-party involvement. News of the tragedy spread quickly. Reporters gathered outside the home that same evening. The quiet neighborhood, known for its peace and prosperity, suddenly became the focus of media attention. Coverage highlighted the striking contrast: a respected family, a successful businessman, a devoted music instructor, 6 children, and an inexplicable tragedy. Neighbors were in disbelief. They described the Johnsons as kind, calm, and closer-knit. No one had ever heard raised voices or seen conflict. Some said they'd seen Olin and Carolyn just the night before, acting normal and showing no hint of tension. Local newspapers repeatedly highlighted the most puzzling part: why a family grounded in faith, admired for their kindness, with no apparent troubles. What could have led to this? Inside, investigators continued searching the house carefully. Every item was considered a possible clue. Phones, computers, and handwritten notes were all examined. Everything pointed to one conclusion: Olin had acted alone, calmly and with intent. By evening, Carolyn's body was taken to the Utah County morgue for autopsy. The results matched the scene findings: multiple closer-range gunshot wounds delivered deliberately. With no evidence of chaos, Olin died from a single gunshot to the temple. The wound's angle matched how he was found, and evidence showed the weapon had been in his own hand. After the tragedy in American Fork, speculation spread quickly. Some thought there had been a fight, while others suspected outside involvement. However, official findings pointed to a single conclusion: it appeared to be a personal matter, with no sign of third-party involvement. What confused everyone was how someone described as rational, kind, and dependable could be linked to something so tragic. The case quickly became the talk of the town. People kept asking how a man so devoted to his family could cause such devastation in moments. Investigators started their work right after the autopsy results were released. Officers from the Utah County Sheriff's Department interviewed Carolyn and Olin's children and other relatives. The older children described the days leading up to the incident as normal. No arguments, financial troubles, or tension between their parents. The younger ones also noticed nothing unusual. Detectives followed several leads. The first theory involved money, suggesting possible inheritance issues or financial stress. But investigators learned that the Johnsons' assets had been evenly divided, with no disputes or legal complications. Olin's business was doing well. Their bank accounts showed no irregularities, and there were no unpaid debts or lawsuits. The financial motive was ruled out. Next, police explored the idea of a home invasion. They inspected every door and window. None had been forced open. Neighboring surveillance footage showed only Olin leaving the house and returning alone. Hours before the incident, no unexpected visitors or vehicles appeared. The break-in theory was dismissed. Rumors soon circulated online, including claims that someone heard shouting from the Johnson home the night before. But none of the neighbors confirmed this, and the rumor eventually faded. There were also whispers of infidelity. Investigators reviewed text messages, emails, and phone records, but found no evidence of outside relationships or improper communication. With no clear motive, the case only grew more puzzling. Olin had no mental health diagnoses, treatment history, or behavioral warnings. His colleagues described him as disciplined and reliable, while friends called him a caring father with no signs of aggression. That left investigators with one last theory: emotional collapse. It might have been stress or a hidden depression, but even that was uncertain. There were no farewell notes or signs of planning. Everything indicated a sudden, inexplicable décision. One brief controversy followed a week later when the Johnsons' oldest son filed a life insurance claim for his father. The paperwork was correct, but the claim listed the death as accidental. The insurance company denied it, citing the circumstances of the case. The story caught media attention, but no legal action was taken against the son. After the funeral, close family friends launched a GoFundMe campaign for the children. Donations surpassed $80,000 within a day, intended for education and living expenses. Public reactions were divided. Some thought the fundraiser came too soon. Police reviewed the transactions to confirm there was no link to the investigation and found no wrongdoing. Public interest continued to grow. Reporters gathered outside the Johnson home, interviewed neighbors, and published family photos. News outlets released repeated stories, all echoing the same theme, a mysterious tragedy in what seemed a perfect household. Police issued short updates, but no new information ever surfaced. Each theory collapsed, one after another. There were no hidden affairs, debts, threats, or signs of outside involvement. Neither of them showed aggressive behavior or careful planning before the tragedy. The night before, Carolyn and Olin had attended a church event, spent time with family, and appeared completely calm and serene. Even among investigators, opinion differed. Some believed Olin suffered a sudden emotional breakdown. Others insisted the evidence didn't fit the pattern of a typical crime, followed by self-harm. Ultimately, authorities concluded that Olin was the perpetrator, but the motive remains a mystery. The community demanded answers, yet investigators had none. When the case closed, the questions only grew. There were no farewells, no warnings, no preparations, nothing to explain what happened. It seemed that the truth behind that night might never be uncovered. 4 days earlier, Olin had posted a photo of himself on his motorcycle with a caption mentioning how motorcycles had always been there for him. The post drew attention because he rarely shared personal thoughts. His children responded with affectionate comments, unaware that anything was amiss. After the tragedy, that post became central to the investigation. Forensic psychologists noted that the caption could hint at guilt or emotional distress, though it didn't appear to be a clear warning. Investigators examined his online activity, search history, messages, and calls, but found no evidence of planning or intent. Nothing had been deleted, and there were no signs of tampering. Conversations with his wife and children were ordinary, revolving around family life and work. Financial records were normal. Medical files revealed only a brief episode years earlier when Olin was treated for mild depression related to exhaustion. He completed treatment and never sought further help. Psychiatrists consulted later suggested that Olin may have experienced an acute psychotic episode in 2024, a sudden and severe break from reality that can lead to loss of control without visible warning signs. This theory became the only one investigators considered plausible. Neither his health, lifestyle, nor work explained how a stable, respected man could destroy everything he cared for in moments. The reconstruction showed that the first shots occurred in the living room. Carolyn's body was later moved to the bedroom and placed on the bed with her hands folded and a blanket nearby. As though someone intended to cover her, it was a calm, deliberate act, not one driven by panic. Olin remained close by. His body was found on the edge of the bed, facing her, with the weapon between them, the same gun used in the crime. Experts concluded he stayed for several minutes before taking his own life. Their positioning suggested he wanted to preserve a final connection. The autopsy confirmed the investigators' findings: a murder, followed by self-inflicted death, all from the same weapon. Evidence pointed to inner turmoil and an attempt by Olin to restore some sense of order after realizing what he had done. According to the final report, that was his last conscious decision. When the investigation was completed, the bodies of both men were returned to their families. Carolyn's family held a private funeral, attended by colleagues and students. Olin's funeral was private, without a public eulogy. Two parts of one family, forever separated. The story ended in silence rather than resolution. After the tragedy, life for the Johnson family was divided into before and after. The older children stepped in to care for the younger ones, trying to keep daily life steady. Once filled with music, the house now felt unbearably quiet. The youngest son, the one who had first entered that bedroom, needed professional help to cope with what he had witnessed. For a long time, he couldn't talk about that day or face anything that reminded him of it. His doctors said he was living with post-traumatic stress, a lasting emotional scar. Both sides of the family, Carolyn's and Olin's, supported one another and stayed involved throughout the investigation. Yet when the case was officially closed, none of them could fully accept the conclusion that Olin had suffered a sudden mental break. They remembered him as calm, loving, and respectful. But the evidence said otherwise. The weapon, the fingerprints, the gunpowder residue, the expert analysis, the Utah County Sheriff's Office determined that Olin had committed the crime. Though no clear motive was found, the report couldn't explain why it happened. It only described what did. For investigators, the case became a stark reminder that the real reasons behind a tragedy often lie deep within a person's private struggles, beyond the reach of any official inquiry. For Carolyn and Olin's children, the memory of their parents remains conflicted. Over time, the raw grief may fade, but it will never completely disappear. At 51, Suzanne Simpson seemed to have it all: a thriving career in luxury real estate, 4 beautiful children, and a picture-perfect life in the quiet, affluent streets of Alamos Park, Texas. To her friends, she was the embodiment of success and grace, the woman who could balance work, motherhood, and community with effortless charm. But on the night of October 6, 2024, that perfect image shattered. After attending an exclusive event at a private club, Suzanne vanished without a trace. Before dawn, the peaceful neighborhood was pierced by the echo of distant screams from the woods behind her home. Screams that would soon haunt investigators and neighbors alike. By morning, Suzanne was gone. Her husband, Brad, filed a missing person report, claiming confusion and concern. But as detectives began to peel back the layers of their marriage, a chilling revelation emerged months earlier. Suzanne had told her banker that if she ever went missing, people should look for her in a lake. It was a haunting premonition, one that would turn a missing person case into one of Texas's most disturbing mysteries. And as the investigation unfolded, every clue seemed to whisper the same terrifying question: what really happened to Suzanne Simpson that night? Suzanne Simpson graduated from the University of Texas at Austin in 1995 with a degree in communications. She worked for 6 years at Dell Computers before moving into real estate, a career she has enjoyed for over 13 years at Nix Realty. Colleagues say Suzanne has a deep understanding of the San Antonio real estate market and is dedicated to her clients. Whether it's the middle of the night or on a holiday, Marnie Simpson, Suzanne's sister-in-law and co-owner of Nix's Realty, said Suzanne was always upbeat, sincere, and kind. She was open, approachable, and never pretended to be something she wasn't. Suzanne is also an avid runner, having completed 22 marathons and even qualified for the Boston Marathon. She ran about 8 miles daily and valued her fitness and discipline, but above all, she was a devoted mother to her 4 children, aged 20, 18, 15, and 5. Friends described Suzanne as a hands-on mother who organized everything from kindergarten playdates to high school sports games. Her eldest daughter, Chandler, was studying fashion design in Paris and New York. At 51, Suzanne seemed to be living the ideal life with 4 children and was beloved by the community. But on October 6, 2024, after attending an exclusive event at a private club, she vanished without a trace. Suzanne and her husband, Brad Simpson, had been married for 22 years. They lived in an early 1990s bungalow in Alamos Park, an upscale, close-knit neighborhood with a reputation for safety and community vigilance. Brad, 53, stands 6 feet 3 inches tall and works as a licensed real estate agent and investor in real estate and construction projects throughout Central Texas. A graduate of Olmos Heights High School and the University of Texas at Austin in 1994, he had been associated with over a dozen Texas-based companies, though most eventually failed. Brad previously worked at Cotter & Sons, a real estate firm, from 2002 to 2012, and partnered with the owner's son, James Cotter, on several business projects, but Brad's financial situation was rocky. Between 2019 and 2020, American Express sued him twice for more than $25,000 in unpaid debt. He had also been involved in multiple legal battles, including one against Cotter & Sons, that reached the Texas Supreme Court. Acquaintances described Brad as confident but controlling and intensely jealous. One friend told investigators that Brad tracked Suzanne's phone and monitored her whereabouts. 2 months before she disappeared, in August 2024, Suzanne confided in her Frostbank personal banker, Gabriela Speicher, that Brad had been physically abusive. She said he frequently took away her phone, later claiming to their children that she had lost it. During that same conversation, Suzanne made a haunting statement: if she ever went missing, they should look for her in a lake. Despite these warning signs, there were no police reports or protective orders. The abuse went unreported and hidden behind the walls of their Olmos Park home. Suzanne's mother, Barbara Clark, later confirmed knowing of at least one physical altercation between her daughter and Brad, though she believed it was an isolated incident and was deeply shocked by the revelations. Barbara had made plans for Suzanne to move in with her. Suzanne's youngest child would attend school in Barbara's neighborhood, but that plan never came to fruition, as Suzanne disappeared the night she called to say Brad had hurt her again. On that Sunday evening, Suzanne wore a short, dark dress, sun heels, and had her sandy blonde hair partially tied back. Around 8 p.m., she and Brad took their 5-year-old daughter to a party at the Argyle, a private club in Olmos Heights that had been around for 170 years. Several people reported seeing the couple arguing, then fighting. According to what their daughter later told a school counselor, Brad pushed Suzanne against a wall, hit her in the face, and injured her elbow. Suzanne and her daughter left the party around 8:30 p.m. Between 8:40 a.m. and 8:51 p.m., surveillance footage showed them shopping at an H-E-B grocery store. At 9:15 p.m., Suzanne called a family friend to say she was coming over. 1 minute later, two things happened simultaneously. Suzanne called her mother, Barbara, saying Brad had assaulted her and that she was in pain. At the same time, Brad accessed their AT&T account and suspended Suzanne's phone service. At 9:25 p.m., surveillance confirmed Suzanne arrived at her friend's home in Olmos Heights. But by 10:22 p.m., data from the Find My app showed her phone had returned to the home she and Brad shared, and that was its last known location. Between 10 and 11 p.m., a neighbor across the street heard an argument outside his window. When he looked out, he saw Brad and Suzanne fighting in the front yard. Suzanne was trying to escape, while Brad tried to pull her down. She finally broke free and ran toward the wooded area east of the house. With Brad chasing her, the neighbor went inside to get a flashlight, then heard 2 or 3 screams coming from the wooded area. Those were the last sounds anyone ever heard from Suzanne. Around midnight, the neighbor heard Brad's black 2019 GMC Sierra truck start and leave the house. 1 or 2 hours later, the truck returned. At 11:09 p.m., FBI forensic experts later found that Brad had started turning his phone on and off in lockdown mode, an uncommon behavior used to avoid tracking. He continued this throughout the next day. At 12:33 a.m., about an hour after the screams, HEB surveillance showed Brad's truck with a large ice chest in the bed. At 7:15 am, Suzanne's phone had its last recorded activity. placing it in a business parking lot in Olmos Park. The phone was never found. At 7:53 a.m., surveillance from Howard Early Childhood Center captured Brad dropping off his daughter at school. In his truck bed were at least 2 white trash bags with red ties and the same large ice chest. At 9:12 Whataburger drive-through footage in Kendall County showed his truck loaded with 3 white trash bags, a heavy-duty trash bin, an ice chest, and a large, bulky object wrapped in blue tarpaulin weighed down with a metal firewood rack. Investigators later recorded that the object under the tarp was believed to conceal something due to its shape and size. The arrest affidavit noted that this was consistent with how criminals often conceal or transport victims to avoid detection. At 9:53 Brad's phone location showed him at a Home Depot in Boerne, Texas. Surveillance video captured him buying 2 bags of quick-set cement, an orange bucket with a lid, a box of heavy-duty trash bags, a bottle of disinfectant spray, and insect repellent. He paid in cash, which was unusual for him. In the parking lot, he asked an unidentified man for directions to the nearest dump in Boerne. After leaving, Brad put his phone back in lockdown mode, cycling it on and off between 10 and 11 o'clock a.m. Location data placed his truck near the Kendall County Solid Waste Facility. A few minutes later, Brad stopped at a petrol station in Boerne, where he bought fuel and 2 one-gallon jugs of water. The 3 white rubbish bags that had been in the truck bed were gone. Still visible were the blue tarpaulin, firewood rack, rubbish bin, and ice chest. Brad had also changed his shoes, switching from sandals to dark cowboy boots. Location data then showed him driving west toward Bandera in Medina County, where he stayed for about 13 minutes. His phone continued cycling on and off. At 1:41 p.m., a number plate reader captured his truck returning to Boerne. The blue tarpaulin was no longer visible, and the firewood rack had been moved. Around 3 o'clock p.m., the school called Brad to report that his 5-year-old daughter had not been picked up, something her mother, Susanne, did every day. At 3:27 p.m., surveillance footage showed Brad collecting his daughter. At that point, only the ice chest and heavy-duty rubbish bin remained in the truck. The firewood rack was gone. At 4:07 p.m., Brad went to the bubble bath car wash on San Pedro. Cameras recorded him cleaning the driver's front area and the rear left passenger side of the vehicle. Later, police found dried cement splashes inside the rear passenger area, and in the truck bed, only the ice chest remained. Everything else had been removed. Brad never reported Suzanne missing. The entire day passed without him contacting police, even though she had failed to pick up their daughter. At 9:57 p.m. on October 7, nearly 24 hours since Suzanne was last heard from, a concerned friend called Brad. When she learned he hadn't contacted authorities, she told him she would file the missing persons report herself. 14 minutes later, Brad left a voicemail for Olmos Park Police Chief Fidel Villegas. He said that he had not seen his wife since 11 o'clock p.m. the night before, and that she had lost her phone at HEB. However, phone records showed her device was at home at 10:22 p.m., and Brad had suspended her service personally. Brad failed to attend a scheduled follow-up interview with police and moved to his ranch in Bandera County. He appeared to be distancing himself from his family. At 4:35 p.m., he texted James Cotter to ask if Cotter was in Bandera and if Cotter could come to his house quickly, explaining that he didn't have much time. Cotter replied that he would arrive in 40 minutes. Brad then told him to make sure he left everything at the pump, especially the gun. Then, at 8:31 p.m., Cotter texted Brad, telling him to come and promising not to tell anyone, adding that Brad was like a brother to him. On October 8, Brad created 2 notes on his phone titled "This Next Life" and "Last Will and Testament." In them, he apologized for physically assaulting Suzanne in August 2023 and again on October 6, 2024. He also called his brother Barton to apologize for the trouble he had caused at 1:30 a.m. Police arrested Brad on Interstate 10 East in Kendall County. He was charged with assault, family violence, and unlawful restraint. He had cuts and bruises on his arms and hands. Brad showed no surprise or emotion about his wife's disappearance, immediately requested a solicitor, and refused to cooperate with investigators. A search of the Simpson home revealed a new indentation on the wall at the bottom of the stairway, matching the couple's daughter's account that Brad had pushed Suzanne there. Police found one bag of cement, even though Brad had purchased two, along with the heavy-duty rubbish bin, metal firewood rack, and a box of black rubbish bags. Only 28 of the 32 remained. The housekeeper confirmed that the family normally used white rubbish bags with red handles, the same kind seen in Brad's truck. In a locked gun room, police discovered multiple firearms, including an unlicensed short-barrel rifle, leading to federal charges. On October 9, Texas Rangers found a burn site on the family's Bandera County ranch where a laptop and several phones, 3 belonging to Brad, had been destroyed by fire. On October 21, police searched James Cotter's home in the upscale Dominion neighborhood. Acting on a tip from a previously reliable anonymous source, investigators searched behind a wall-mounted television in Cotter's bedroom. There, hidden in a hollowed-out section of the wall, they found a fully automatic AK-47 rifle. Evidence showed that Cotter had taken the rifle from Brad's weapons vault on October 8, just 2 days after Suzanne disappeared. Cotter was arrested and charged with evidence tampering and possession of prohibited weapons. His bond was initially set at $1 million. In December 2024, a key piece of evidence emerged that became central to the prosecution's case. A grand jury indictment revealed that Brad had deliberately hidden a reciprocating saw, an electric tool capable of cutting through metal and bone. On December 5, law enforcement notified Suzanne's family. Suzanne's DNA was found on the jigsaw that Brad had tried to hide. 1 month after she went missing, Brad was officially charged with murder. His total bond was set at $5 million. The charges included murder, tampering with evidence involving a human corpse, tampering with physical evidence, and possession of prohibited weapons. If convicted, Brad faced a sentence ranging from 5 to 99 years, or possibly life in prison. Lead prosecutor Casey Sandoval noted that although no body had been recovered, that did not prevent them from filing the case. He emphasized that the law does not tolerate those who dispose of a victim's body. On December 3, 2024, Brad's defense attorney, Stephen Gilmore, filed a motion to dismiss the indictment. He argued it was too vague and failed to specify how Suzanne died or the act that caused her death. Without a body or a medical examiner's report, he claimed the defense could not adequately respond to the charges. The motion was argued before Judge Joel Perez on April 22, 2025. Prosecutor Sandoval countered that Texas law did not require proof of the exact method of killing, only that Brad intended to kill Suzanne and caused her death. On April 29, Judge Perez denied the motion, ruling that prosecutors had presented enough evidence for the murder charge to proceed. The case would go to trial. Despite Suzanne's body still being missing, Texas Rangers, Olmos Park Police, FBI agents, and local sheriff's departments searched extensively across 3 Texas counties. They focused on wooded areas where neighbors had reported hearing screams, parts of Interstate 10 near where Brad was arrested, and Brad's ranch in Bandera County. By October 2025, a year later, Suzanne Simpson's body had still not been found. Texas DPS spokesperson Dion Cockrell stated that searches would continue for as long as necessary, noting that remains are sometimes discovered even years later. On November 5, 2024, Brad and Suzanne's 20-year-old daughter, Chandler, posted a viral statement on Instagram. She said that her father had taken her mother's life in a state of rage and control. She added that women in Olmos Heights had been told to keep quiet and that it was time to speak for her mother. Statements from Chandler and her siblings contradicted Brad's account, helping police secure the search warrant that led to the discovery behind Cotter's wall. On September 22, 2025, Judge Perez confirmed that both sides had received sufficient evidence to move forward. The case materials included 5 to 6 terabytes of data, surveillance video, phone records, and forensic reports. Brad remained in the Bexar County Jail under administrative segregation, confined to his cell for 23 hours each day. Pre-trial hearings were scheduled for January 20, 2026, with the trial set to begin on February 13, 2026. The prosecution's evidence included the neighbor's eyewitness account of screams and struggle, Suzanne's DNA on the saw, video tracking Brad's movements with wrapped objects, receipts for cement and trash bags, burned electronics, the secret AK-47, and Brad's written admissions of past assaults. Investigators believe that, based on the timeline and available evidence, Brad attacked Suzanne soon after she returned home that night. Sometime between 10 and 11 o'clock p.m., a neighbor reported seeing a physical struggle in the front yard before Suzanne managed to escape and run toward the woods, with Brad chasing after her. The screams that followed were the last sounds anyone heard from Suzanne. Investigators think Brad killed her in or near the woods, most likely by strangulation, and then brought her body back home. The next morning, a neighbor saw a large, bulky object wrapped in blue tarpaulin in Brad's truck. Combined with Suzanne's DNA found on a reciprocating saw, this suggests that he dismembered her remains. His careful actions over the next several hours, visiting dumps, buying cement, and making multiple trips across county lines, point to a calculated effort to dispose of her body and eliminate evidence. Legal experts consider the case to be strongly supported by circumstantial evidence. A year after Suzanne Simpson's disappearance, her body has still not been recovered. Her daughter, Chandler, continues to raise awareness about domestic violence and vows to be her mother's voice until she is found. The Texas Department of Public Safety continues the search. While the community awaits trial, everyone is working together to bring justice for Suzanne, even though the journey to bring her home is not yet complete. It was a quiet evening in Bristol, just after 8 p.m., when things took a dark turn inside a home. The shouting grew louder, followed by a sudden silence. A young child stood at the top of the stairs, watching what no child should ever see. Someone lying on the kitchen floor downstairs, bleeding. The other person was already trying to hide what had happened. This wasn't just a fight. It was the breaking point of a relationship full of jealousy, anger, and years of warning signs. No one expected that night to end in tragedy, but when the truth came out, it shocked everyone. Abigail White was born in 1998 and raised in Bristol, England. The early chapters of her life were defined not by innocence or joy, but by chaos and abuse. From a young age, Abigail found herself in a home dominated by violence. Her father was abusive, routinely harming her mother. Though her parents eventually divorced, any hope for peace was short-lived. Abigail's mother entered a new relationship, and a new man moved into the home. Instead of stability, the cycle of abuse continued, with the new man creating a similarly hostile environment. When Abigail's mother gave birth to a new child, her stepfather's cruelty escalated. He began abusing Abigail. The trauma was finally exposed. Abigail was removed from the home and placed into foster care, but the damage had already taken root. Foster care was supposed to be a turning point, a place to heal. But Abigail carried her scars with her. School became an ongoing struggle. She had trouble focusing, lashed out frequently, and reacted violently to the smallest disruptions. Her anger wasn't just surface level. It came from a deep place, a defense mechanism forged by years of trauma. She demanded control in all situations, often exploding when she didn't get her way. Eventually, her behavior led to expulsion, and she was transferred to a school designed for students with serious behavioral issues. She briefly lived with her grandmother, but even that environment proved too volatile. Her grandmother couldn't handle Abigail's unpredictable moods. The girl was just 13 when she was sent back to her biological father, an alcoholic who was in no position to provide stability or guidance. Though Abigail made efforts to attend therapy, her pain remained raw. She began drinking, and cocaine followed. She would later say the banned substance were the only escape from the constant darkness in her mind. By 15, Abigail had attempted to end her own life twice. That year, she met her first boyfriend, and it was her first taste of what she believed love could be. For 7 months, she felt some kind of happiness, but once the relationship ended, she spiraled again, and her next relationship would be even more damaging. At 16, she began seeing a 29-year-old man, an age gap that raised eyebrows, but no red flags stopped the relationship. It lasted 2 years, ending shortly after she turned 18. She officially moved into social housing. It was a modest space, but for Abigail, it was the first time she had a home that felt like hers. That's when she reconnected with Bradley Lewis. They had known each other during their school years, but now, as adults, something more grew between them. Abigail was 19. Bradley was 17. Their relationship moved quickly, and they soon welcomed their first child. Over the next 5 years, 2 more children followed. By 23, Abigail was a mother of 3, and Bradley, just 21, worked full-time as a floor installer. Abigail stayed home, raising their children and trying to build a life. But living on one income was hard. Desperate to contribute financially, she began seeking alternative ways to make money from home. That's when she discovered the world of online adult modeling. Abigail launched an OnlyFans account. Her content was bold, provocative, and quickly became a success. Within a year, she earned £50,000. While her income eventually decreased, it still provided a steady income and a taste of validation she had never known before. But money didn't solve her problems. Behind the scenes, her relationship with Bradley was deteriorating. Their home life became increasingly toxic, defined by frequent arguments and violent outbursts, followed by recurring breakups and reconciliations. Neither seemed able to walk away. Despite the mounting emotional damage, Abigail's rage extended beyond the home. In one disturbing incident, she attacked a woman in a nightclub bathroom, convinced the woman had looked at her the wrong way. The victim was severely beaten, and Abigail was sentenced to 12 months of community service. In her daily life, Abigail was controlling, demanding that everything go her way. She issued orders to Bradley, with zero tolerance for disobedience, erupting if he didn't comply. She craved constant affirmation, from compliments to gifts, and any perceived neglect triggered violent confrontations. Her need for attention was insatiable. The relationship between Abigail and Bradley had long ceased to be healthy. What remained was a cycle of fights, betrayals, and emotional warfare. Most days were marked by shouting matches and cold silences that stretched late into the night. Their children were caught in the middle, silently absorbing the surrounding chaos. From an outsider's perspective, the solution seemed obvious: separation. However, neither Abigail nor Bradley seemed ready to leave. Their relationship was characterized by infidelity. Though they were not in an open relationship, both cheated, both knew about the other's affairs, and both reacted with jealousy. Abigail, in particular, demanded immediate responses to her messages, any delay triggering paranoia that Bradley was with another woman. Ironically, while she was also seeing other men, Their boundaries became even more blurred when they engaged in group intimate encounters. Their situation was not merely dysfunctional, it was explosive. Things deteriorated further when Abigail became pregnant and discovered that Bradley had also fathered a child with another woman. That betrayal intensified an already volatile dynamic. Abigail's rage was relentless. Friends and family on both sides urged them to separate before something irreversible happened. Abigail's parents openly despised Bradley, not only for his repeated infidelities, but also for inappropriate messages he had allegedly sent to Abigail's sister. Bradley's family, meanwhile, had their own reasons to distrust Abigail, especially after she stabbed him in the leg during an argument. The wound wasn't life-threatening, but it served as a physical reminder of the turmoil they both refused to escape. Around this time, Abigail's previous assault in the nightclub caught the attention of social services. Authorities ordered a welfare check, concerned for the well-being of the children. The assessment was clear. Abigail and Bradley were living in a toxic and potentially dangerous environment. To avoid losing custody, they agreed to live apart. Bradley moved in with his mother, finding his first sense of peace in years. That brief separation gave Bradley clarity, leading him to seriously consider ending the relationship for good. But when he expressed his doubts to Abigail, her reaction was immediate and severe. She threatened self-harm, an alarming threat given her mental health history. Over time, the threats escalated. She said she would kill the women Bradley had cheated with, the mother of his other child, his own mother, and eventually Bradley himself. By early 2022, Abigail's downward spiral was visible to all. She began posting aggressive and disturbing content on TikTok, airing their dirty laundry with no restraint. She mocked Brad, shared intimate details, and even confessed to violent behavior she had inflicted on Bradley. He felt increasingly trapped. He told friends he feared for his safety, but was too afraid of what Abigail might do if he left. On March 18th, she decided to terminate the pregnancy, a decision Bradley supported afterward. One day later, on March 19th, tensions exploded again. Abigail accused Bradley of cheating, and the fight ended with her stabbing him in the arm. He needed medical treatment, but chose not to report the truth, telling hospital staff it had been an accident. At this time, Abigail messaged a friend, admitting that her relationship had become so dangerous that she believed it would end in one of two ways. Either she would be dead or she would end up in prison. She confessed that she believed herself capable of killing Bradley. Just 6 days later, on March 25th, Abigail and Bradley met in a park for what was intended as a final, honest conversation. Abigail brought a friend, likely to maintain a sense of control or for protection. During the meeting, Bradley told her he was ending the relationship, this time for good. To everyone's surprise, Abigail didn't erupt. She didn't scream or lash out. For once, she remained eerily calm, but with her calmness was never a guarantee of peace. It was often the quiet before a catastrophe. Later that same day, they made plans to meet again. A gathering at a pub was arranged, with a few close friends joining them. Abigail brought their 3 children along. Perhaps trying to project a sense of normalcy, they agreed to meet at around 5 p.m. But when that time passed, Bradley still hadn't shown up. By 5:30 p.m., Abigail began firing off angry messages, furious at his tardiness. Her fury was fueled by the alcohol she had already consumed and further amplified by banned substance. The combination only intensified her volatility. When Bradley finally arrived at 7 p.m., he was met not with a smile, but with raw, seething rage. Abigail had convinced herself he'd been with another woman. Bradley retreated to the restroom with a friend, desperate to decompress and speak freely. There, he admitted how lost he felt and how helpless the situation had become. He no longer knew how to reason with Abigail, but even in that small, private space, there was no escape. When Bradley and his friend emerged, Abigail was waiting just outside the door. She exploded, screaming and accusing them of conspiring against her. Before anyone could react, she lunged at Bradley, In front of stunned onlookers, Abigail launched a violent assault. Bradley's friend tried to pull her away to restore calm, but Abigail spat directly in his face. The situation had escalated beyond control. Fearing further violence, Bradley's friends decided to leave. Abigail and Bradley remained, attempting once again to patch things up. Bradley ordered a round of beers, hoping to de-escalate the situation, but Abigail slapped them off the table, sending glass and foam crashing to the floor. Customers looked on in disbelief. Strangers tried to intervene, hoping to prevent further escalation, but Abigail turned on them, too, throwing a drink at one man and spitting in his face. When the man tried to push her away in self-defense, Abigail fell. She immediately called the police to report an assault, omitting the key detail that she had provoked the confrontation. Her children witnessed the entire ordeal, absorbing yet another violent chapter in their already unstable home life. By 8 p.m., Abigail and Bradley and their kids left the pub. A friend they met outside offered them a ride home. On the way back, Bradley made a comment that would later send chills down the spine of everyone who heard it. "I'm already dead," he said, aware of what likely awaited him at home. And he was right. As soon as they stepped through the front door, the argument resumed, louder, angrier, and more volatile than ever. Abigail blamed Bradley for what had happened at the pub, furious that he hadn't defended her against the man she accused of attacking her. At some point during the shouting, Abigail walked into the kitchen and came back holding a knife. Bradley had seen this before. Blades weren't new to their arguments, but this time she didn't hesitate. In one swift, violent motion, Abigail drove the knife directly into his chest. In the background, their 3-year-old son had crept downstairs, drawn by the noise. He witnessed it all. Both Abigail and Bradley froze. The rage disappeared, replaced by stunned silence. Bradley, bleeding heavily, stumbled back into the kitchen and collapsed onto the floor. But instead of immediately calling for help, Abigail panicked. Rather than grabbing the phone, she grabbed cleaning supplies. She put Bradley's blood-stained shirt into the washing machine. She tried to scrub the floor clean. She didn't want anyone to see what she had done, not even herself. This was the third time Abigail had injured Bradley with a knife, but this time she knew it was different. This wound wouldn't fade into a scar. It was too deep. Moments later, hearing the commotion, a neighbor rushed over. She found Abigail distraught, barefoot, wearing a pink dress and sporting a bruise on her arm, but no trace of blood. Bradley, meanwhile, lay motionless on the kitchen floor. Leaning over him to check for a pulse, she felt the faintest trace of breath. With trembling hands, she began performing CPR while still on the phone with emergency services. The operator instructed her to apply direct pressure to the chest wound. As she did, she noticed something deeply alarming. Very little blood was escaping. This was a terrifying sign of internal bleeding, indicating Bradley's body was beginning to shut down. The neighbor attempted to place him in the recovery position, but he was too heavy for her to move alone. Around 8:22 p.m., her husband returned home and immediately sensed that something was wrong next door. When he entered the house, he found his wife desperately trying to keep Bradley alive and took over chest compressions. Time was quickly slipping away. By 8:48 p.m., police had arrived, already spiraling into hysteria. Abigail called a friend, claiming Bradley had harmed himself. She insisted he had tried to take his own life and begged for reassurance that he would survive. The story had already begun to shift. Moments later, paramedics arrived. Bradley, just 22 years old, was rushed to the hospital and taken straight into surgery. But the damage was too severe. The knife had penetrated very deep, straight into his heart. Despite hours of surgical efforts, doctors pronounced him dead. Back at the scene, Abigail White was arrested. But even during her interrogation, she stuck to a version of events that didn't add up. At first, she claimed Bradley had stabbed himself. She then changed her story, claiming he had wrestled the knife from her. Later, she insisted Bradley had grabbed her hand, which was holding the knife, and forced it into himself. The narrative kept shifting, each version seemingly tailored to avoid blame. Unbeknownst to Abigail, there was a silent witness. Her 3-year-old son had seen it all. Incredibly, despite his age, the child was able to give police a clear and damning statement. "Mommy stabbed Daddy." It was a heartbreaking confirmation of what investigators already suspected. The evidence was overwhelming, and eventually, Abigail could no longer deny what she had done. She confessed, but claimed it had been a moment of passion. She insisted she hadn't meant to kill Bradley, only to hurt him in a moment of rage. But one detail was impossible to ignore. Abigail never called an ambulance. While Bradley lay dying on the floor, she chose to mop up his blood, toss his shirt in the wash, and stage the scene. She claimed she'd tried to call for help, but couldn't get a signal. Yet, she managed to contact a friend to spin a story about end his own life. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered chilling internet searches made by Abigail in the days leading up to the murder. She had looked up how to tie a noose and whether someone could die from a broken heart. On March 17th, just 1 week before the killing, she also searched for miscarriage-related topics and information about stabbing incidents. In October 2022, Abigail White stood trial at Bristol Crown Court. The prosecution presented a large amount of evidence. This included security camera footage from the pub concerning TikTok videos she posted, voice messages, and over 200 statements from witnesses. Her plea to downgrade the charge to manslaughter was rejected. She was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison with a possibility of parole after 18 years. Psychiatrists testified that Abigail suffers from borderline personality disorder, a diagnosis rooted in the profound trauma of her early life. But mental illness alone couldn't excuse the choices she made. Today, Abigail White remains behind bars. Reports have surfaced suggesting she is in a new relationship. It's a fact that continues to anger many who knew and loved Bradley. Still reeling from the loss, his family expressed what so many felt, that no sentence could truly reflect the life that was stolen. They say they were given their own life sentence, waking up each day to a reality without their son, brother, and father of 3. Bradley's memory, however, lives on. Hundreds attended his funeral, and public memorials now stand in his honor. His kindness, his love for his children, and his enduring popularity are remembered by all who knew him. To them, he is not gone. He is still their son, still a father, still loved, and always will be. Caitlin Coons first met Jonathan Jones when she was only 15 years old, and he was 30. Their relationship would soon spiral into something deeply troubling. Caitlin, who had spent much of her young life in Ohio's foster care system, she was living in a group home in Canton when she first encountered Jonathan. She had faced numerous challenges throughout her childhood, bouncing between foster families and care facilities. She desperately seeking stability and someone who would truly care for her. Like many children in state custody, she had experienced multiple placements, each bringing its own disappointments. These constant moves had left her feeling abandoned, creating deep emotional wounds that made her vulnerable. Caitlin couldn't help but hope that each new placement would provide the loving, stable environment she craved, but these hopes were repeatedly dashed. Jonathan, 15 years her senior, seemed to offer the attention and affection that Caitlin had been searching for. However, their relationship was far from appropriate or legal. At 30, Jonathan was a grown man who should have known better than to pursue a romantic relationship with a 15-year-old girl. Caitlin couldn't help but be drawn to someone who appeared to understand her struggles and offered her the emotional connection she had been craving. What she didn't realize was that she was becoming involved with a predatory man who would ultimately lead her down a dark and destructive path. As their relationship developed, it became increasingly clear that Jonathan was taking advantage of Caitlin's vulnerable state. Caitlin's unstable past made her emotionally vulnerable, and she became dependent on Jonathan, who took advantage of her youth and desire for love. Jonathan manipulated Caitlin by exploiting her weaknesses. He told her she was mature, different, and their relationship was special. These tactics are commonly used by predators to make victims feel responsible for their own exploitation. Jonathan had complete control, and Caitlin became isolated, making it difficult for her to see that she was being manipulated and believed their relationship was genuine. Even though there were clear warning signs, her longing for love and inexperience with healthy relationships blinded her to the fact that she was being victimized. She saw Jonathan as her rescuer, the one finally giving her the love she desired. In March 2023, Jonathan's predatory behavior was exposed when he was convicted of enticing a child to view adult material and child endangerment. The court found that he had engaged in intimate with 15-year-old Caitlin and planned to sell photographs of their encounters. This revealed the extent of his exploitation and abuse. After the conviction, the court had ordered him to stay away from Caitlin and put a GPS tracker on him to monitor his location. Despite these efforts, tragedy was unavoidable. Nicole Jones, Jonathan's 53-year-old mother, lived in Sylvania Township. She was very worried about her son's relationship with the teenage girl, Caitlin. She was concerned about Jonathan's legal problems and the negative impact the relationship was having on both of them. As a caring mother, Nicole had seen her adult son making increasingly bad choices. She had tried to support him, but his relationship with a teenager and the resulting legal issues were almost too much to bear. Nicole felt stuck between her love for her son and her duty to protect a vulnerable young girl. The seriousness of the situation and the potential consequences of Jonathan's actions made her even more anxious. As a mother, Nicole had always tried to see the best in Jonathan, even when his behavior was clearly problematic. However, his relationship with Caitlin represented a new level of concern. The teenage girl was undeniably vulnerable and traumatized, and Jonathan appeared to be exploiting someone who needed protection. Nicole felt a sense of responsibility, not only for her son's actions, but also for Caitlin's welfare. She had repeatedly talked to Jonathan about the inappropriate nature of his relationship, pointing out the age difference and legal ramifications. She remained steadfast in her belief that Jonathan needed to end the relationship and seek help for the issues driving him to pursue someone so young and vulnerable. In April 2023, despite the court order, Caitlin made the fateful decision to leave her foster care placement in Canton. The 17-year-old girl, still deeply attached to Jonathan, couldn't resist what she believed was love. She met Jonathan at a local restaurant, and together they returned to his mother's home in Sylvania Township. Caitlin hoped this reunion would somehow make everything better, that they could find a way to be together without further problems. Nicole didn't know that Caitlin was secretly living in her house. Caitlin had climbed in through Jonathan's bedroom window and was hiding from Nicole. This created a stressful and difficult situation, as Caitlin was living a secret life in Nicole's home, where Nicole was trying to live normally. This situation put a strain on everyone. Nicole was unaware of everything happening in her own home, and it was becoming harder to keep Caitlin hidden. Caitlin had to stay quiet during the day and avoid being seen. Caitlin grew frustrated with the secrecy and the constant fear of being discovered, and she realized that this situation couldn't last. As days passed, the strain of keeping Caitlin's presence hidden became increasingly difficult. Jonathan knew it was only a matter of time before his mother discovered Caitlin's presence, and he knew his mother would not approve. It was evident that Nicole was genuinely concerned about both Jonathan's welfare and Caitlin's. However, her attempts to intervene and protect them would ultimately put her in grave danger. The tension in the household reached a breaking point when Caitlin became convinced that Nicole was the primary obstacle to her being with Jonathan. Warped by trauma and manipulation, Caitlin was unable to see that Nicole's concerns were legitimate and protective. Instead, she viewed Nicole as an enemy, deliberately trying to destroy her relationship. This perception fueled increasingly dark thoughts about how to eliminate the perceived obstacle. On April 19, 2023, Caitlin's frustration and desperation reached a dangerous crescendo. She made a decision that would forever change multiple lives. Caitlin gave Jonathan an ultimatum that was both shocking and terrifying in its cold calculation. Jonathan had 5 hours to kill his own mother, Nicole, or she would end their relationship forever. This demand was so extreme and disturbing that it revealed the depth of Caitlin's psychological disturbance and the toxic nature of their relationship. Jonathan, faced with this impossible choice, found himself paralyzed by fear and indecision. Although he had made numerous poor choices in his life, including his predatory relationship with Caitlin, the prospect of murdering his own mother was apparently beyond even his moral boundaries. As the 5-hour deadline approached, Jonathan could not bring himself to harm the woman who had given him life and had tried to help him throughout his struggles. Caitlin wanted Jonathan to kill Nicole. When he refused, she gave him an extra hour, hoping he would change his mind. But Jonathan still didn't act. So, Caitlin decided she would kill Nicole herself. She believed that for her relationship with Jonathan to work, Nicole had to die. Despite feeling troubled and pressured, she resolved to commit the murder since Jonathan wouldn't. On the evening of April 19th, 2023, Nicole Jones stood in her kitchen, facing her refrigerator. Unbeknownst to her, Caitlin was outside and had found a large rock. Caitlin brought the rock inside, intending to use it as a weapon. Nicole continued her usual evening routine, completely unaware that Caitlin was about to end her life in a shocking and violent way. Her kitchen, normally a place of comfort, was about to become the scene of a brutal crime. As Nicole stood with her back turned, focused on whatever she was retrieving from the refrigerator, Caitlin approached from behind with the rock in her hands. In a moment of pure evil and violence, Caitlin began bludgeoning Nicole over the head with the rock, striking her multiple times with brutal force. The attack was swift and merciless, giving Nicole no opportunity to defend herself or even understand what was happening. As if the bludgeoning wasn't enough to ensure Nicole's death, Caitlin then strangled her, making certain that she would never again interfere in her relationship with Jonathan. Jonathan was in the living room when his girlfriend, Caitlin, murdered his mother in the kitchen. Instead of calling for help or trying to save her, Jonathan chose to help Caitlin hide the crime. This decision made him an accomplice in a shocking murder case. They worked together to dispose of Nicole's body. They drove to 2 local stores, purchasing a tarp and garbage bags to wrap Nicole's lifeless body. They returned to the house and wrapped Nicole's body in the materials they had purchased. After wrapping the body, Jonathan and Caitlin loaded Nicole into the trunk. In perhaps one of the most disturbing details of this case, prosecutors later revealed that Jonathan and Caitlin actually went out to dinner while Nicole's body remained in the trunk. Following their dinner, they drove to a nearby apartment complex and disposed of Nicole's body in a dumpster, treating her as mere garbage to be discarded. The dumpster was collected the following day as part of the normal garbage pickup, and Nicole's body was taken to a landfill. Even though law enforcement searched thoroughly, Nicole's body was never found. This prevents her family from having the closure they would get from a proper burial. With Nicole's body disposed of, Jonathan and Caitlin decided to flee the area to avoid prosecution. They took Nicole's 2021 Buick Encore and began driving west, eventually crossing the border into Mexico. Along with the car, they also took Nicole's social security card, identification, credit cards, and health insurance card, essentially stealing her identity along with her life. However, their escape was short-lived. Caitlin, perhaps overwhelmed by the magnitude of her actions, made a critical error that would lead to their capture. While on the run, she contacted one of her caregivers and confessed to the murder, admitting that she had killed Jonathan's mother. This confession prompted the caregiver to immediately contact law enforcement, who began working with U.S. Marshals to track down Jonathan and Caitlin. The search for Jonathan and Caitlin became an international manhunt, with law enforcement agencies on both sides of the border cooperating to locate them. Fortunately for investigators, Jonathan was still wearing the Jeep's tracking device, mandated as part of his earlier conviction. This device allowed authorities to track their movements and ultimately locate them in the municipality of Ahumada, in the state of Chihuahua, Mexico. On May 8, 2023, approximately 3 weeks after Nicole's murder, U.S. Marshals and Mexican authorities successfully apprehended both Jonathan and Caitlin. They were found in possession of Nicole's vehicle and personal documents, providing further evidence of their guilt. Jonathan and Caitlin was extradited back to the United States to face charges for their roles in Nicole's brutal murder. Before, back in Ohio, law enforcement had been conducting a thorough investigation into Nicole's disappearance and presumed death. The investigation had begun on May 5, 2023, when Canton police contacted Sylvania Township Police requesting a welfare check on Nicole Jones. When officers arrived at her condominium, they were unable to locate her, despite conducting a thorough search of the premises. As the investigation unfolded, the true horror of what had transpired became clear. Detective Jake Albright of the Sylvania Township Police Department interviewed Caitlin extensively after her arrest, and she provided detailed confessions about how she had murdered Nicole. The case against both Caitlin and Jonathan was overwhelming. In addition to Caitlin's confessions, investigators had Jeep's tracking data from Jonathan's ankle monitor that corroborated the timeline of events and their movements after the murder. Surveillance footage from the stores where they purchased supplies further supported the prosecution's case against them. Initially, prosecutors charged Caitlin with aggravated murder, abuse of a corpse, felonious assault, and tampering with evidence. Given the serious nature of the charges and the calculated manner in which the crime was committed, the court decided to charge Caitlin as an adult. Despite her being only 17 at the time of the murder, Jonathan faced even more charges, including 2 counts of aggravated murder, felonious assault, aggravated burglary, aggravated robbery, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. However, as the case moved through the legal system, both defendants ultimately decided to accept plea agreements rather than face trial. On June 4, 2024, both Caitlin Coons, now 18, and Jonathan Jones, 33, appeared in Lucas County Common Police Court before judge. They each pleaded no contest to charges of aggravated murder and abuse of a corpse. As part of the plea agreement, prosecutors agreed to dismiss the remaining charges against both defendants. The judge sentenced each of them to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. While this sentence ensures that both will spend decades behind bars, it also means that they could potentially be released while still relatively young, a thought that brings little comfort to Nicole's grieving family. During the sentencing hearing, the impact of Nicole's murder on her family became painfully clear. Nicole's brother, Robert Jones, who is the administrator of her estate, spoke about the devastating effect her loss has had on their family. Lucas County Prosecutor Julia Bates addressed the case following the sentencing, acknowledging the horror of what had transpired and expressing hope that the resolution would bring some measure of peace to Nicole's family. She said, "This was a horrific event." In her statement, they are relieved to reach a resolution in this case. They hope this brings some measure of peace to Nicole Jones's family. May her memory forever live in their hearts. As a result of this case, Robert Jones, representing Nicole's estate, has filed a civil lawsuit against Caitlin and Jonathan for wrongful death. The lawsuit seeks $25,000 in damages, in addition to punitive damages and other expenses. The suit acknowledges that no amount of money can truly make up for Nicole's death and the way it occurred. A tragic part of this case is that Nicole's body has never been found. Her family has been deprived of the fundamental right to give her a proper burial and have a place to remember and honor her. Not knowing where Nicole's remains are located intensifies their suffering. This case serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences that can result from predatory relationships and the exploitation of vulnerable individuals. Caitlin, who began as a victim of Jonathan's inappropriate pursuit when she was just 15, ultimately became a perpetrator of one of the most brutal murders imaginable. While this transformation does not excuse her actions, it highlights the complex dynamics that can develop when adults prey upon children who are already struggling with trauma and instability. The residents of Sylvania Township, especially those in Nicole's condominium complex, were deeply disturbed by the terrible crime. Many residents are elderly and had moved there because they thought it was a safe and peaceful place to live. The shocking murder of their neighbor by her son and his teenage girlfriend destroyed their feeling of safety and showed that violence can happen anywhere, even in quiet communities. As this case comes to a close with the sentencing of both perpetrators, Nicole Jones's family continues to struggle with their immense loss. It was evident to everyone that Nicole Jones was a caring mother who had tried to protect both her son and the teenage girl her son was exploiting. Her concern for their welfare ultimately cost her life as she became the victim of a crime so brutal and senseless that it continues to shock all who learn about it. The house, once filled with laughter, was now suffocating in a deadly silence. Coming home from school, Carmen could never have imagined that just a few steps through the door would shatter her entire world. On the bedroom floor, in the cold and narrow space, her 16-year-old daughter, Maria Jesus Troncoso, lay bound and barely breathing. With the last of her strength, Maria whispered a single word, the name of her attacker, Jorge. That final breath did more than break a mother's heart. It ignited a nightmare that spread through the city of Los Angeles, Chile. A murder that shocked the nation, a killer hiding in plain sight, and a question that lingers to this day. How could a girl so full of light and dreams meet such a cruel end? Maria Jesus Troncoso was born on May 22, 2007, in Los Angeles, Chile. She was the younger of two daughters of Carmen Gloria. Her arrival filled the home with joy. Family members celebrated enthusiastically, and her older sister, Camila, was especially excited to welcome her. A few months later, that happiness was overshadowed by her parents' separation. The breakup brought emotional strain and financial difficulties. Even so, Carmen found the strength to carry on, relying on her job as a teacher to support her daughters. Those tough years strengthened their bond, turning them into a united team that faced every challenge together. Over time, sisters Maria and Camila grew closer, sharing interests and hobbies. Together with their mother, they formed an inseparable trio. They often went shopping, watched movies at the cinema, attended concerts, and went on hiking trips. Their connection was more than family. It was a partnership built on love and support. In 2023, their routine changed slightly when Camila moved to another city to study occupational therapy. Though it was only 2 hours away, she couldn't be home during the week. However, every weekend, she returns to Los Angeles to spend time with her mother and younger sister, Maria. At 16, Maria was in secondary school. She stood out for her strong academic performance, kindness, involvement in extracurriculars, and eagerness to help others. She had a natural instinct to protect those in need. She often rescued abandoned animals, cared for them, and found people to adopt them. She also joined feminist marches, defending women's rights and speaking out against gender-based violence. Cheerful, outgoing, and affectionate, she was admired for her compassion. On the weekend of October 14 to 15, 2023, Camila visited as usual. She spends time with her family and shares moments with her younger sister Maria. During those days, Maria asked for advice about what to do after finishing school. She was unsure about her career path and even considered following Camila into occupational therapy. It was a conversation like many they'd had before, without knowing it would be their last. The next day, Maria began to complain of stomach pain. The discomfort continued through Tuesday, and by Wednesday evening, she told her mother she didn't want to go to school on Thursday because she felt too unwell and needed to rest. Her mother, Carmen, agreed, Her daughter looked tired and pale. She hoped a day of rest would help. On Thursday morning, October 19, Carmen left for work at 7:30 a.m., going to the school where she taught. About a half-hour drive from their apartment, Maria was still asleep, so they didn't say goodbye. Around 8:30 a.m., Carmen received a text message from Maria asking for money, about $200, to buy clothes for an upcoming school event. The request immediately made her suspicious. Her daughter rarely asked for money for such things, and even asked for it to be transferred immediately. Concerned, Carmen started a video call. What she saw unsettled her. Maria didn't fully show her face, and the camera moved as if someone else were holding it. Her behavior felt off, and when the conversation returned to money, Carmen grew more worried. Carmen explained she didn't have the money at that moment, but Maria insisted she take it from the condominium funds. At the time, Carmen was the treasurer of the residential complex and had access to that account. The insistence and unusual tone deepened her unease. For Carmen, the suggestion to use condominium funds was the final red flag. Her daughter didn't know the balance of that account, and it was unthinkable that she would propose taking money that wasn't theirs. That request was completely contrary to Maria's character and went against the values Carmen had instilled in her daughters. The uneasiness in Carmen's heart kept growing. Trusting her instincts, she asked to leave her school duties and drove straight home. As soon as she walked in, the house felt unnaturally silent. She ran upstairs to the main bedroom, where Maria had spent the morning, opened the door, and was confronted with a devastating scene. Her daughter lay on the floor, wrapped in a blanket between the bed and the nightstand. In a panic, Carmen ran to Maria and found her daughter's hands tied behind her back and her ankles bound. Desperate, she began untying her and shouted for help. Maria was still breathing, but with difficulty, her chest rising and falling unevenly. In her final moments of consciousness, Maria whispered one word, identifying her attacker: Jorge. She then asked her mother to hold her. Carmen's cries for help echoed through the building, but almost no one responded. Only relatives of a man named Jorge Reboledo Martinez, who stayed at a nearby aunt's house, came forward. They were the ones who ultimately called emergency services. Shortly after, Jorge himself arrived, approaching calmly, asking what was happening, and offering help. Carmen, in shock and focused on saving her daughter, did not grasp the importance of the name her child had uttered. Paramedics arrived within minutes and tried to resuscitate Maria for more than half an hour, but they could not save her. Maria, 16, was pronounced dead at the scene. Carabineros officers arrived soon after, secured the area, and began collecting evidence. One fact was clear: Maria had been attacked in her own home. The attacker had either forced entry or been allowed in by someone she trusted. Carmen gave a detailed statement. She explained why her daughter had stayed home, described the strange call and messages, and repeated her daughter's final word. Her initial testimony quickly became a key part of the investigation. Police turned their attention to the man identified as Jorge. Investigators soon learned that Jorge was not a permanent resident. He occasionally stayed in the building with relatives. As they dug deeper, they uncovered his extensive criminal history. He was far from an ordinary neighbor. Shockingly, Jorge had once served in the Carabineros, but was dismissed in 2014 after being arrested by his own colleagues for multiple offenses. In the days after the murder, he was initially questioned as a witness. During interrogation, however, he confessed he had killed Maria. With his confession, he was immediately arrested and placed in preventive detention while the investigation advanced. A deeper review of his past revealed a pattern of violence and crime, convincing investigators that the tragedy in Los Angeles was not an isolated act, but part of long-standing, unchecked behavior. His record included arrests for simple assault, robbery with intimidation, and violent robbery. An officer involved in his previous arrest shared disturbing details. Most of his victims were women, and during a search of his room, police found several women's underwear among his belongings. He had been sentenced to 5 years and 1 day in prison from August 29, 2015 to August 23, 2019, but secured early release in March 2019. Even more troubling, he later managed to erase his criminal record, leaving no official trace of his convictions. After his release, he maintained what authorities called an irreproachable conduct record, a technicality that allowed him to avoid scrutiny from neighbors and community leaders. In his initial statement about Maria's murder, Jorge gave a chilling account. On the morning of October 19, 2023, he entered through the front door, went straight to the kitchen to take a knife, and then headed upstairs to the main bedroom. There he encounters 16 years old Maria, shocked and terrified. Maria froze when she saw him. He threatened her with the knife and demanded money. Maria gave Jorge everything she had, 20,000 Chilean pesos in cash, about $20. Jorge said it wasn't enough. When she insisted she had no more, he tied her hands and feet and forced her to call her mother to demand additional money. Because Maria couldn't hold the phone, Jorge held it for her. That explains why, during the video call, Carmen couldn't clearly see her daughter's face and why the camera moved oddly. When Carmen refused to send money, Jorge became enraged. He ended the call and attacked Maria with such brutality that her injuries proved fatal. Realizing she was dying, he took the cash, a gold ring, and her phone. He later confessed to throwing the knife into a nearby river to destroy evidence. Divers recovered a knife, matching the description, which was sent to the forensic lab for analysis and comparison with Maria's wounds. For her family, the loss was devastating. On Friday, October 27, relatives, classmates, friends, teachers, and even strangers gathered to say goodbye. The funeral was filled with grief and a collective demand for justice. Her sister, Camila, emerged as a leading voice for accountability. She questioned how an alleged robbery could end in such a cruel killing. After his arrest, Jorge cooperated with investigators, handing over the clothes he wore that day and providing biological samples for comparison with evidence from the crime scene. Jorge was formally charged with robbery with homicide, and a court ordered his preventive detention during the ongoing investigation. Authorities set a 5-month investigation period, with a hearing scheduled for March 2024. Meanwhile, Maria's friends launched an online campaign calling for the harshest penalty, life imprisonment without parole or early release. The campaign gained traction, fueled by public anger over perceived failures in the justice system. Many asked, if this was only a robbery, why murder a teenager so mercilessly? Investigators did not rule out that Jorge had been watching the family's home. It was known in the neighborhood that only women lived there, which may have made them seem like an easy target. On November 3, 2023, the first march demanding justice for Maria took place, organized by her family. It was the start of a series of demonstrations over the following months, all echoing the same message: justice delayed is justice denied. After Jorge's arrest, the legal process became a nightmare for Maria's family. Progress was far slower than they expected. The March hearing never happened. Delay tactics by the defense pushed the first hearing to June 26, forcing the family to wait months just to begin the trial. Camila keeps the memory of her younger sister Maria alive through social media posts, interviews, and constant participation in protests. Each month, on the anniversary of the murder, she shared tributes and raised awareness. Her goal was clear: to secure a life sentence for the man who shattered their family. On May 22, 2024, the family marked what would have been Maria's 17th birthday, a painful day used to honor her kindness, solidarity, and compassion. Around that time, a mural was painted in her memory during a public event, turning her legacy into a symbol of resilience for the community. Meanwhile, the judicial process continued to move slowly. At a hearing to review precautionary measures, the judge maintained Jorge's preventive detention. The prosecutor's office requested 15 more days to complete the investigation, another delay that tested the family's endurance. During that session, Maria's relatives and friends gathered outside the courthouse with banners demanding justice. In August 2024, the lead prosecutor announced that the state would seek the maximum penalty under Chilean law, qualified life imprisonment, which would keep Jorge in prison without the possibility of early release. The prosecution also disclosed its case plan: 30 witnesses, both civilians and police, and 6 forensic experts would testify to reconstruct the events. As the months passed, preparations advanced for the oral trial, scheduled to begin on December 26, 2024. Just as the family felt close to confronting Jorge in court, another setback occurred. The December 26 hearing was postponed to January 6, 2025, again at the defense's request. For Camila and her mother, the delay was unbearable. After more than 10 months of emotional preparation to face the man responsible for Maria's death, they were told to wait yet again. Camila spoke publicly, condemning what she saw as a defense strategy indifferent to their suffering. For her and her mother, each delay was not merely legal maneuvering, it prolonged their pain and reinforced the feeling that justice remained out of reach. Throughout the process, Maria's family sought not only justice in her case, but also broader reforms. They supported legislative proposals to impose harsher penalties on violent offenders. Lawmakers even began drafting the Maria Jesus Troncoso Law, inspired by her case. The bill aimed to strengthen punishments and prevent offenders from obtaining early release or sentence reductions. As Jorge had previously done, it also sought tougher penalties for non-intimate femicides, cases in which a man murders a woman with whom he has no romantic, familial, or cohabiting relationship. Maria and Jorge had no prior connection, and her death exposed a legal gap that many felt left women unprotected. Advocates argued that existing penalties were too lenient, and the proposed law aimed to fix that. By September 2025, the bill's passage in Congress was still uncertain. Meanwhile, the long-awaited trial began on January 6, 2025. Over 10 days, the tribunal heard from 33 witnesses, reviewed forensic analyses, and examined the evidence gathered by prosecutors. Key evidence included Maria's personal belongings recovered from Jorge's home, and DNA found on his clothing that matched her genetic profile. Additional evidence came from geolocation data linked to Maria's cell phone, reported missing by Carmen and later found in Jorge's possession. Surveillance footage placed him near the residence. Most damaging was his own confession. The defense tried to exclude it, claiming constitutional violations, but the court ruled the confession valid. The defense also tried to downgrade the charges to simple robbery, with violence followed by homicide. The tribunal rejected that argument, concluding the murder occurred during the robbery itself. The crime was therefore classified as robbery with homicide. After more than 15 months of waiting, the court delivered its verdict. Jorge Rebolledo Martinez was sentenced to qualified life imprisonment. This sentence requires at least 40 years in prison before he becomes eligible for any form of release. With no alternative sentences or early benefits, he was also permanently barred from holding public office or any official role and lost his political rights for life. For Carmen, the sentence could not heal the wound. She acknowledged that no ruling could bring back her daughter or erase the pain. Still, the decision offered a measure of relief, a formal recognition that justice had finally been served. The murder of Maria left a profound mark on her family and the community. Her case resonated far beyond Los Angeles, Chile, as a stark reminder of the dangers women continue to face and the urgent need for stronger protections. On the night of September 11th to 12th, 2015, in downtown Curitiba, a heavy thud echoed from the 31st floor of a high-rise building where silence usually ruled. Residents rushed outside and looked up toward the open window. Within minutes, the police dispatcher received a call from a man. His girlfriend just jumped out of the window. When officers arrived, lying on the pavement was the body of a young woman. Her name is Renata Mugiati, 31 years old. The man who had reported the incident introduced himself as Dr. Rafael Sus Marque. He appeared agitated, but remained composed. Detectives went up to the apartment. The spacious rooms were filled with the strong smell of alcohol and bore signs of disorder. On the table sat an unfinished bottle of liquor. On the floor lay a woman's shoe and a cell phone. The bedroom window was wide open, the curtains billowing in the breeze. The windowsill was unusually high, far too high for a simple, accidental fall. In one corner stood a small shelf, which Rafael claimed Renata had stepped on before jumping. Police carefully documented the scene. While there were no clear signs of a struggle, the details painted a troubling picture. Scattered belongings, a broken necklace, and visible handprints on the window frame. Everything suggested a scene that might have been deliberately staged. Rather than the spontaneous act of a desperate woman, Renata Mugiati was born and raised in the state of Paraná. From a young age, she stood out for her discipline, determination, and strength of character. After finishing school, she pursued a degree in physical education, where she found her true passion. She dedicated herself to bodybuilding, eventually transitioned to the professional body fitness category. Her results were quick, impressive. Renata became the Paraná state champion, won 3 Brazilian national titles, and earned the title of South American champion. In the early 2010 seconds, Renata launched a personal blog and built a social media presence where she shared training tips and insights into her competition prep. Her sculpted physique, relentless work ethic attracted thousands of followers. Her audience grew rapidly. This visibility led to sponsorships from sports, nutrition brands, and fitness companies. She became recognized as a fitness muse and was able to support herself doing what she loved most. Alongside competing, Renata worked as a personal trainer. Her schedule was always packed, so full that she often had to decline new clients. She lived alone in her own apartment with her 2 dogs and valued her independence deeply. To many women, she represented strength and self-made success. Someone who had built her career without anyone's help. In 2014, at the peak of her fitness career, Renata met Dr. Rafael Sus Marque. Both were 31 years old. Rafael was an endocrinologist specializing in hormonal therapy and metabolic medicine. Within the athletic community, he was known for being ambitious, confident, and eager to market himself. He often boasted about his elite clients, claiming to be the doctor of champions. Their connection began online. Renata came across his profile, an attractive, muscular man, and left a comment. He replied almost immediately. Messages turned into conversations, then dates. Soon, the two were in a relationship. They shared a passion for fitness, disciplina, and high performance. To Renata, the relationship felt natural, even promising, being with someone who understood an athlete's lifestyle and could support her goals. Things progressed quickly. Within a few months, Renata moved into Rafael's apartment on Avenida Visconde de Guarapuava. On the 31st floor, to outsiders, they looked like the perfect couple. Successful, attractive, and seemingly in control of their lives. No one knew what was happening behind closed doors. However, behind the polished exterior, Raphael's behavior began to shift. He insisted on overseeing every detail of Renata's training and nutrition. Although she was a certified athlete and professional trainer, he began micromanaging the smallest aspects of her life. The hour she returned home, the clothes she chose, the people she spoke to. At first, it appeared to be concern, but it quickly became clear that it was something else entirely: control. Raphael repeatedly reminded her of how much he contributed to her success. Renata, long accustomed to making her own choices, gradually stopped resisting in order to avoid conflict. Little by little, the independence she had spent years building began to erode. In a relationship where almost every decision was made by him, Renata's voice faded. To friends and acquaintances, Raphael remained charming, confident, but behind closed doors, he grew increasingly demanding, intolerant of disagreement, and obsessive about dictating every part of Renata's day. What once looked like a promising partnership soon transformed into an environment where Renata's freedom, both personal and professional, was quietly stripped away. As time passed, the dynamic between them deteriorated further. What began as subtle influence hardened into absolute domination. Friends, colleagues, and even longtime clients slowly disappeared from her life. Unable to cope with Raphael's constant restrictions, Renata found herself isolated. He had taken control of not only her personal life, but her career as well. He blocked new opportunities, demanded she delete older content, and insisted that he alone had the right to shape her image. Any pushback from Renata triggered sudden episodes of anger. Then, under the guise of concern, Raphael began telling her she was mentally unwell and needed treatment, despite the fact she had no history of psychological issues. Without consulting any licensed mental health professional, he began prescribing antidepressants and strong sedatives on his own. Gradually, Renata became passive, emotionally numb, lost the drive and discipline that had once defined her athletic success. By mid-2015, Renata's physical and emotional state had changed drastically. Following Raphael's instructions, she started refusing food and dropped weight at an alarming pace. Her rapid decline alarmed those who knew her, but Raphael barely allowed her to maintain contact with anyone. Behind the mask of care, he isolated her completely, gaining control over her body, her mind, and ultimately, her will. The home that was supposed to be a safe haven had become the very place where a strong, confident woman was slowly being stripped of her identity. By the middle of that year, Renata no longer resembled the vibrant athlete people admired. The once powerful and radiant competitor had withered into a fragile version of herself. In just a few months, her weight plummeted from around 155 pounds to barely 110. In photos taken shortly before the tragedy, her face appeared hollow, her muscles diminished, and her expression vacant. She stopped going to the gym, the place that had always been her refuge. Clients tried to reach her, but their calls went unanswered. Messages went unread. Her social media, once filled with training videos, motivational posts, and glimpses of her daily discipline, fell silent. To her followers, that sudden silence was the first undeniable sign that something was terribly wrong. Her family had sensed the shift even earlier. Renata's mother and sister said she had become distant, cautious, and guarded, speaking carefully, as if afraid to say too much. When they managed to reach her, her voice lacked its usual warmth and energy. It sounded restrained, subdued. She had not only lost her health, she had lost her sense of self. With no support system left, she lived on a schedule that wasn't her own. Even her presence seemed to fade. Like someone who was no longer making her own choices, her decline wasn't sudden. It was a slow, unraveling, an erosion of body and spirit that mirrored the total dependency Raphael had cultivated. Then, on September 8th, 2015, Raphael called the police, claiming he could not get into his apartment. He said the door was locked from the inside and no one was responding. Officers arrived and helped him force it open. Inside, they found Renata unconscious on the bedroom floor. Nearby were a bottle of alcohol and several packets of medication. Raphael immediately told officers that she had likely attempted to take her own life. Paramedics examined her. She appeared drowsy and disoriented, but no toxicology tests were performed. The incident was officially recorded as an attempted take-her-own life. After a brief evaluation, Renata was left at home. Later, investigators would call this the turning point, the moment Raphael began deliberately crafting the narrative that Renata was emotionally unstable. A few days after the September 8th incident, disturbing posts appeared on Renata's social media accounts, brief, cryptic messages that read like farewells. Followers immediately sensed something was wrong. The tone didn't match Renata at all. The posts vanished almost as quickly as they appeared. No screenshots were taken, but multiple people later confirmed they had seen them. At the time, her loved ones believed Renata was truly in a fragile state. But later, when investigators extracted deleted data and reviewed her digital activity, they learned that Raphael had access to all her devices and knew every password. Investigators would later suspect that the September 8th episode was not an accident at all, but the first stage of a plan. Raphael's actions that night appeared calculated. Instead of calling an ambulance immediately, his first call was to the police, ensuring there would be an official incident report documenting Renata as emotionally unstable. This early record would eventually become the foundation of the story he desperately wanted to build. On the evening of September 11th, 2015, Raphael and Renata went to a private club, one of his regular hangouts, where he drank and played pool. Witnesses later said the couple barely spoke. Raphael looked tense. Renata, withdrawn. Around midnight, they left. Surveillance footage captured them returning to the apartment building at 12:28 a.m. Raphael walking ahead without glancing back. Inside the apartment, the atmosphere quickly deteriorated. Approximately an hour later, Raphael claimed he left briefly to buy drinks, returning at 12:54 a.m. with a single bottle of beer. Around that same time, neighbors heard raised voices. The argument escalated into shouting. Then came sounds of impacts, dull, rhythmic, and a woman's cry, followed by sharp silence. At 2:27 a.m., Raphael took several photographs on his phone. In the images, Renata sits on the windowsill, her legs hanging outward, her hands gripping the frame. These photos would later become critical evidence. Raphael insisted he was trying to stop her, but the images didn't show panic, movement, or any attempt to intervene. They showed a man documenting a moment between 2:27 a.m. and 2:37 a.m. Something crucial occurred. Investigators believe this was when Raphael approached her from behind, applied force to her neck. The autopsy later revealed a fractured hyoid bone and compression marks inconsistent with a fall, findings that conclusively pointed to manual strangulation. These findings indicated that Renata lost her life due to strangulation. Afterward, he allegedly moved her body toward the open window, used a nearby shelf for leverage, bent her limbs, and pushed her outward. At that moment, he shouted something in a voice meant to imitate hers, so neighbors would hear what sounded like a cry of despair. At 2:47 a.m., he called the police and reported that his girlfriend had jumped from the window. His actions after the call raised even more suspicion. He phoned his parents first, not emergency responders. Then he called his therapist. Only then did he contact the police a second time. When officers and paramedics arrived, Raphael was eerily calm, repeating the same rehearsed line. From that moment on, investigators began piecing together the final hours of Renata's life. The photos discovered on Raphael's phone, the lack of signs of a struggle near the scene, the mismatch between the injuries on her body and the reported cause of death all pointed to the same unsettling truth. An argument ends in a calculated act, deliberately staged to look like a tragic accident. The official investigation began the very night Renata died. Her body was taken to the Institute of Forensic Medicine, where the autopsy was assigned to a doctor named Daniel Coleman. Strangely, despite having informed his supervisors earlier that he was too ill to work, he unexpectedly appeared for duty that night. His involvement would later raise serious questions. Shortly after the examination, an official report concluded that Renata's injuries were consistent with a fall from a great height and stated there were no signs of external aggression. The document declared that Renata had taken her own life while in a state of emotional distress. This initial report quickly reached the press, shaping public opinion and creating the impression that the case was settled. But within the forensic department, colleagues noticed several irregularities. The final report had not been uploaded from Coleman's workstation. It had been submitted from a computer belonging to a former employee dismissed for manipulating official documents. The discovery triggered an internal audit, though no formal action was ever taken, leaving a shadow of suspicion that lingered for years. Renata's family never accepted the findings. When they saw her body, they immediately noticed injuries not mentioned in the report: bruises on her neck and arms, abrasions on her face, and marks they found impossible to reconcile with a fall. When they questioned staff members, the responses were vague, guarded, almost as if everyone had been instructed to stick to the same script. Meanwhile, Raphael's family, well connected within Curitiba's medical community, began telling anyone who would listen that Renata had been emotionally unstable. They insisted she had been struggling mentally. Their claims were reinforced by Raphael himself, who publicly portrayed himself as a worried partner who had tried everything to help her. The rushed autopsy, coupled with these carefully coordinated statements, helped cement a narrative that worked entirely in Raphael's favor. And so, two versions of the truth emerged: the official one, that she ended her life, and the real one, the one her family was now forced to prove from scratch, fighting against a system where the initial documents could easily determine the outcome. Refusing to accept the official explanation, Renata's sister, Tina, took charge. She began collecting everything she could: photos, messages, witnesses, medical consultations. A respected attorney from Pará, Claudio Dalladone, joined the case. He was the first to publicly challenge the initial autopsy, asserting that the evidence clearly contradicted any suggestion of self-harm. Tina gave him photos Renata had taken just 3 days before her death, which showed bruises on her legs and face, a cut on her ear, and visible signs of physical abuse. In confidential messages to a friend, Renata admitted she was being assaulted by her partner, but said she was too afraid to file a report. These materials formed the basis of a legal petition demanding a second autopsy. The court agreed. Renata's body was exhumed, and in 2016, an independent team of forensic specialists conducted a new examination. The findings completely overturned the original report. They concluded that Renata's heart had stopped beating before the fall, evidenced by the absence of vital bleeding in her injuries. The original autopsy by Coleman was declared invalid, and the case was officially reclassified. From presumed end her life to homicide, Tina's unwavering persistence and the attorney's intervention became the turning point that transformed Renata's death from a tragic accident into a criminal investigation. When the case reopened, investigators examined Raphael's past, and what they uncovered suggested a troubling pattern. Police records revealed a report filed by another woman he had been involved with before meeting Renata. In December 2014, during a custody exchange with his former partner, an argument escalated into physical violence. She went to the police immediately, documented her injuries, and a medical report confirmed signs of trauma. Multiple neighbors corroborated her account. In court, Raphael denied everything, claiming the accusations were fabricated, but the medical evidence and witness testimonies contradicted him. He was convicted and sentenced to 4 months, a penalty he was allowed to serve under electronic monitoring. As investigators dug deeper, they found additional complaints from other women who had briefly been involved with Raphael. Their accounts were strikingly similar: bursts of aggression, control, and an obsessive need to dominate every aspect of their lives. For prosecutors, these testimonies reinforced their argument that Renata's death was not a spontaneous reaction. Raphael's behavior reflected a long-standing pattern of deliberate abuse, masked by the polished facade of a respected medical professional. After the second autopsy, progress was painfully slow. Judges were replaced, witnesses failed to appear, and Raphael's defense team filed motion after motion, delaying the trial at every possible step. Throughout all of this, Raphael continued practicing medicine as if nothing had happened, treating patients while facing charges of murder. Renata's family repeatedly voiced their belief that he was benefiting from influence, connections, and quiet pressure behind the scenes. One controversy that captured national attention involved attorney Claudio Dalladone. While representing Renata's family, he was simultaneously defending another man accused in a case disturbingly similar to Renata's: the death of Tatiana Spitzner, another woman whose fall from a building was initially framed as self-harm. When this conflict of interest became public, Renata's sister, Tina, dismissed Daldone and successfully petitioned for a new prosecutor to be assigned to the case. Throughout the hearings, Raphael displayed a shocking lack of respect for the court. In one notable incident, he asked to be excused due to supposed work obligations. Days later, it was revealed he had actually spent that time competing in a poker tournament. Furious, the judge revoked his bail and ordered him into custody until the trial's conclusion. By January 2019, Raphael was placed in a detention facility to await trial. Only then did the case finally begin to move forward. A series of defense motions were rejected, and the proceedings entered their decisive phase. The prosecution presented all accumulated evidence: photographs, forensic reports, digital records, and witness testimonies that directly implicated Raphael in Renata's death. In February 2023, after years of legal battles, a jury in Curitiba delivered its verdict in the case of Renata Mugiati. After evaluating the extensive evidence and hearing from key witnesses, the court found Raphael Sus Marque guilty of intentionally causing his partner's death. He was convicted on multiple counts, including femicide, physical assault, denying the victim any chance of defense, and tampering with evidence. Raphael Sus Marque was sentenced to 31 years in a high-security prison. His appeal was rejected. For Renata's family, the verdict represented a long-awaited measure of justice. They emphasized that their 8-year battle required extraordinary courage, persistence, and emotional strength. The public responded with overwhelming support. The Mugiati case became a powerful national symbol in the fight against domestic violence, demonstrating that even when systems fail, determination and truth can still prevail. On the morning of August 8, 2024, deep in the Amazon rainforest, just a few miles from the town of Yurimaguas, a police truck slowly made its way down a muddy road toward a remote wooden compound. known locally as Centro dos Mundos. A sudden shout came from one of the cabins, standing apart from the main structures. Seconds later, officers smashed the door open with the butt of a rifle. Inside, the dim cabin was a scene of chaos. Bowls overturned, glass shattered across the floor, and the remnants of a small fire still smoldering at the center of the room. The air was thick, with the metallic scent of blood and smoke. A nearly naked man, drenched head to toe in red stains, knelt motionless, staring straight ahead. His lips twitched, murmuring words no one could understand. Nearby lay the body of a woman. Her corpse bore multiple wounds, and signs of a violent struggle marked the room. Blood smeared the walls, the floor slick beneath the investigators' boots. This wasn't just a crime. There was a ritual involved. Outside, staff members and local residents gathered in small clusters, murmuring about the two foreign visitors who had been staying there for several weeks. Police photographed the scene, sealed the cabin, and ordered everyone back. The eerie stillness of the jungle stood in stark contrast to the horror inside. Later that day, investigators confirmed that the man was a Ukrainian national and the woman was Russian. They had come to Peru seeking spiritual healing. Centro dos Mundos was a sprawling wooden complex, roughly 40 minutes by car from Yurimaguas, hidden deep within the Loreto jungle. At first glance, it looked like a simple retreat. Several cabins, a communal dining area, a ceremonial hall, and an open fire circle. Officially, however, the center promoted itself as a spiritual sanctuary, offering soul cleansing through ancient Amazonian practices, primarily through the use of ayahuasca and other psychoactive plants. The center was founded by a local man named Jose Ordóñez Sanchez, who grew up in the nearby village of Teniente Cesar Lopez in the Alto Amazonas province. From a young age, Jose claimed he could heal animals, even his own mother. Through touch alone, he began participating in ayahuasca ceremonies at age 12 and later declared himself a shaman. His background in acting and directing, which many eyewitnesses mentioned, made his ceremonies particularly theatrical, filled with dramatic pauses, vivid gestures, and powerful emotional cues. The center's website described it as a place where the worlds of spirit and humanity meet, with ayahuasca unlocking inner transformation. Promotional materials promised freedom from trauma, restored energy, even recovery from addiction. Visitors were offered jungle lodging, daily ceremonies, private healing sessions with Maestro Jose, and full immersion in Amazonian life. For travelers from Europe, the United States, and Russia, the center seemed exotic, transformative, safe. But behind the spiritual facade was a disorderly system with no medical supervision and no official licensing. Former participants later reported that potent, hallucinogenic plants were freely distributed, often consumed without guidance or proper dosing. Red flags had surfaced long before the tragedy in August. Several former guests accused Jose of inappropriate physical contact during ceremonies and so-called special healing rituals. Local media reported allegations of predatory behavior and emotional manipulation, yet no authorities intervened. The center continued operating, with Jose insisting that everything was part of the cleansing process. Staff later revealed that many visitors remained under the influence of powerful psychoactive substances for weeks at a time. There was no medical intervention planned. Even after the tragic death of Russian tourists, the center wasn't immediately shut down. Instead, journalists were allowed inside, and the property was presented as calm, welcoming. This raised serious doubts about the objectivity of the investigation and prompted a troubling question: why are places like this allowed to operate without oversight? Centro dos Mundos is only one of dozens of such spiritual retreats that have appeared along Amazonian river routes in recent years. They all promise enlightenment and contact with spirits, but rarely have professionals on site who can help if a ceremony spirals out of control. If the events in Yurimaguas resulted in a death, it is unsettling to imagine how many similar centers may be hiding dangers behind a facade of healing and light. As investigators reconstructed the chain of events, the victim's identity was officially released for the first time. Lyudmila Lazarenko, 44, a Russian national. After completing her studies, she married young, later moved with her family to Thailand. It was there, away from the noise of modern cities, that her spiritual path truly began. She eventually opened her own healing studio, where she led meditation sessions and workshops focused on reconnecting the mind and body. Her approach blended Eastern philosophies with shamanic traditions. On social media, she often wrote about gratitude, inner light, and the importance of living gently. She often wrote about trusting the universe and believing in the power of love. Friends described her as compassionate and deeply intuitive. She was the devoted mother of 2 daughters, whom she called her greatest source of love. Inspiration. Despite a busy schedule, she often reminded her followers that preserving inner kindness was the most important practice of all. To the thousands who followed her online, Lyudmila appeared to embody harmony, balancing family, spirituality, and teaching. Over the years, her interest in shamanic rituals grew stronger. She spent 9 years studying meditation, participating in cleansing ceremonies, and guiding others through their own journeys toward emotional recovery. South America gradually became the center of her spiritual focus. She called the region the ancient heartbeat of the earth. In 2022, she traveled to Peru for the first time and met José Ordóñez, the founder of Centro dos Mundos. In a blog interview, she wrote that her first experience with Amazonian shamans changed something deep within her. The jungle, she said, felt alive, like a place where a person can finally hear themselves without the noise of civilization. From that moment on, Peru became sacred to her. Lyudmila returned multiple times, staying for weeks on each trip. According to her husband, the rainforest made her feel restored, grounded, and spiritually connected. Her family remained in Thailand, despite their understandable worries, supported her path. Her public image remained bright. Warm smile, open heart, captions filled with positivity. Her final Instagram post appeared in March 2024, shortly before her last trip to Peru. Under a photo at the airport, she wrote, "This trip will change my life. I feel I'm meant to be there." Months later, her words would take on a haunting significance. Lyudmila departed for her third journey into the Amazon, eager to continue learning from local shamans. After recounting Lyudmila's story, investigators shifted their focus to the second person at the center of the tragedy, Ivan Kuzmin, whose actions on the day of the killing suggested a sudden psychological break. To understand what unfolded in August 2024, experts began examining his past. Ivan was born in Ukraine and dedicated much of his youth to sports, particularly martial arts. His pursuit of strength and discipline shaped his identity. Later, he moved to Russia, began teaching capoeira, a Brazilian martial art that combines acrobatics, dance, philosophy. His students remembered him as energetic and charismatic, though they also noted his volatility, an intensity that could shift from passion to aggression with little warning. Over time, Ivan's dedication to physical training shifted into a pursuit of spiritual exploration. He became increasingly drawn to meditation, energy-based practices, and breathwork. During this period, those close to him began noticing troubling changes. His struggle with addiction surfaced, and he started withdrawing from others for weeks at a time before reappearing with a completely different social circle. His sister later recalled that he spoke frequently about visions, divine messages, and a personal mission to cleanse people of negative energy. In June 2022, Ivan traveled to Peru for the first time to join a program at the Centro dos Mundos retreat. He enrolled as a participant in a spiritual cleansing course. At first, he followed the rules, attended the ceremonies, and behaved calmly, but before long, his behavior shifted. Witnesses said Ivan began demanding increasingly large doses of ayahuasca, insisting that he could see more than other participants. The staff eventually restricted his participation due to safety concerns. After several weeks, Ivan left the center without causing any disturbance. 2 years later, however, he returned, this time not as a humble participant, but as someone who saw himself as an experienced practitioner of Amazonian rituals. By then, his dependence on hallucinogens had become unmistakable. He was reportedly consuming ayahuasca and psilocybin mushrooms regularly, sometimes mixing them with other psychoactive plants. People who encountered him in the summer of 2024 described a man in constant emotional turmoil, fluctuating between euphoria and despair. Speaking obsessively about spiritual purity and a higher mission he believed he had been assigned. In the weeks leading up to the tragedy, Ivan began making increasingly intense comments about Ludmila Lazarenko, calling her pure energy and the light meant to save him. He claimed they were spiritually bound from a past life and that he owed her a sacred karmic debt. Most dismissed this as mystical rambling, but Ivan believed it wholeheartedly. His sister later told reporters that Ivan was not a violent person, but someone who had lost his grip on reality. She described a lifelong struggle against inner chaos, a battle between faith and fear. She said he had experienced drastic mood swings and multiple episodes of emotional collapse long before setting foot in Peru. By August 2024, Ivan's mental state had deteriorated severely. Prolonged use of hallucinogens, combined with isolation and the absence of medical supervision, left him psychologically vulnerable. He interpreted hallucinations as divine messages. He believed he had become a messenger between worlds. At that point, he was no longer able to distinguish vision from reality. What began as a search for spiritual growth had transformed into a dangerous descent into delusion. To understand what happened that night, investigators had to examine the substances used in the rituals. The central one was ayahuasca, a traditional Amazonian brew made from the Banisteriopsis caapi vine and the leaves of Psychotria viridis. Indigenous shamans use it to enter altered states of consciousness, but medically, it is a potent hallucinogen capable of triggering severe psychological breaks. Addiction specialist explains that ayahuasca contains several psychoactive compounds, the strongest being dimethyltryptamine. It interacts with serotonin receptors in the brain, dramatically altering perception. A person may begin to see, hear, and feel things that have no connection to reality. You can start hearing smells or seeing time. Dimethyltryptamine alone wears off quickly, but when combined with the vine that inhibits liver enzymes, the hallucinogenic effects can last up to 6 hours. During that period, users can experience panic attacks, violent impulsivity, severe dissociation, memory gaps, and temporary personality disruption. For someone mentally stable, it can be destabilizing. For someone already psychologically fragile, it can be catastrophic. The risk increases exponentially when ayahuasca is taken alongside other psychoactive plants. At Centro dos Mundos, it was common for participants to also use psilocybin mushrooms and San Pedro cactus, which contains mescaline. All three substances overload the same neurotransmitter system, flooding the brain with serotonin. This can lead to a dangerous condition known as serotonin syndrome, characterized by seizures, respiratory difficulties, extreme agitation, and complete detachment from reality. The combination of these substances often leads to a collapse of consciousness. When a person loses their sense of identity under such conditions, it is common for intense religious or mystical delusions to appear, visions of spirits entering the body, voices whispering commands, or a sudden conviction of being possessed by dark forces. In a confined space with no medical supervision, these episodes can escalate into extreme aggression in a matter of minutes. Neurologists emphasizes that ayahuasca is not medicine, nor a safe path to self-discovery. It is a substance that tears down the brain's natural filters. For someone with latent psychological vulnerabilities, it can become the spark that unleashes irreversible psychosis. For Ivan Kuzmin, that ritual became exactly that, a breaking point. Already struggling with dependency, he kept increasing his doses, mixing ayahuasca with mushrooms and San Pedro cactus. The result was a complete mental overload. His hallucinations hardened into a battle he believed was unfolding between light and darkness inside his own mind. Experts agree that tragedies like this could be prevented with professional oversight, medical supervision, psychological screening, and strict dosage controls. But in informal healing centers, all boundaries disappear. What is marketed as a spiritual journey often becomes an unregulated experiment on the human mind. And for someone already standing at the edge, this mixture can push them past the point of no return. Ivan and Ludmila's paths first crossed in 2023 at the same Centro dos Mundos, where the tragedy would later unfold. She was there as a student, and he as a participant. They connected almost immediately. She sensed that he was struggling emotionally. While he saw her as a guide, Lyudmila helped him recover from the emotional crashes that followed the ceremonies. Ivan convinced they had known each other in a past life. After they left the center, they stayed in contact online. In June 2024, both returned to Peru, arriving just one day apart, Ivan on the 21st and Lyudmila on the 22nd. Staff members later said the two were inseparable, sharing rituals, meals, long meditations in the jungle. According to José Ordóñez, there was no visible conflict between them. They seemed genuinely content. In early August, they traveled to Laguna El Source, near the Tarapoto region, a place known among spiritual travelers as an energetic sanctuary. Witnesses recalled them as calm, joyful, laughing often, and taking photos together. When they returned to the center, they chose to stay in a private hut, saying they wanted space to deepen their spiritual work. But it was during this time that Ivan's behavior began to worry those around him. He asked for higher doses of ayahuasca and spoke increasingly about his mission to protect Lyudmila from darkness. Others dismissed this as symbolic language commonly heard during ceremonies, but beneath the surface, tension was growing. In her journal, Lyudmila noted that something in the atmosphere had shifted. Still, she continued the rituals, hoping the imbalance would pass. Just days later, the bond they believed was spiritual would spiral into a fatal delusion. August 8, 2024. The humid tropical night over Yurimaguas was heavy. Still, away from the main buildings of Centro dos Mundos, stood a small hut made of wooden planks and palm leaves. Inside were Lyudmila Lazarenko and Ivan Kuzmin. It would be the last night either of them spent together. According to investigators, the two decided to perform a private ceremony that evening inside the hut. Authorities later discovered remnants of ayahuasca, powdered psilocybin mushrooms, and traces of San Pedro cactus, the three most potent, natural psychedelics capable of inducing intense hallucinations. The combination is extremely dangerous, even for experienced practitioners. For Ivan, already psychologically unstable, It acted as a catalyst. At first, the atmosphere was calm. They sat across from each other just as they had during previous sessions. Lyudmila, witnesses said, knew how to guide rituals. She played music, hummed chants, and used gentle breathwork. But soon, Ivan's behavior shifted. His breathing became irregular, his movements sharp and restless. He claimed he could sense another presence inside the hut, insisting that someone unseen had entered the room. Later, during questioning, Ivan claimed that at some point during the ceremony, Lyudmila began to change. In his altered state, her face no longer looked human, and her eyes appeared completely black. He insisted he saw a dark spirit enter her body. According to investigators, that moment marked the onset of a severe psychotic break. Ivan reportedly leapt to his feet and started shouting about demons and purification. Lyudmila tried desperately to calm him, but by then, Ivan seemed unable to understand her words. Investigators concluded that he grabbed a nearby object, possibly a metal cup or glass bottle, and struck her with it. Around this time, guests elsewhere on the property reported hearing loud screams coming from the hut. One visitor, staying about 300 yards away later, said he heard a woman shouting in English, "Help me." Another guest sent a message to a staff member saying he thinks something happened to the Russian woman. Staff members ran toward the hut, but the door was locked from the inside. They tried to force it open but couldn't. All they could hear were frantic thuds, crashes, and the unmistakable sounds of a violent struggle. Someone rushed to find the center's founder, Jose Ordóñez. By the time he arrived, the noises had stopped. Jose later told police he looked through a small window and saw a horrifying scene. Ivan, covered in blood, standing over Lyudmila with a knife in his hand. He appeared to be mumbling and gesturing at things that weren't there, as if reacting to invisible entities. When police arrived shortly after the emergency call, they found the interior of the hut in shambles. Furniture overturned, objects scattered across the floor, streaks of blood on the walls. Ivan, half-dressed and visibly disoriented, stood in the center of the room. He didn't resist arrest, but seemed entirely detached from reality. At the moment, officers restrained him. He reportedly said only one sentence: "I took down a demon." Experts would later determine that he had experienced a full psychotic episode triggered by a combination of powerful hallucinogens. To everyone present, what unfolded felt sudden, chaotic, and surreal. Within hours, Centro dos Mundos was surrounded by police, and footage of the arrest had already made it onto Peruvian television. Cameras showed a dazed, blood-covered man being escorted out by officers. When a reporter asked who the victim was, one investigator responded quietly, "She came searching for light." She found death in eyewitness video taken at the scene. Ivan can be seen alternating between laughter and shouts of, "She was possessed. I was saving her soul." When officers finally broke through the hut door, Ivan was still standing in the middle of the room, unresponsive to commands. He suddenly screamed, then burst into laughter. As officers attempted to handcuff him, he lunged forward and tried to bite one of them. They were only able to restrain him with help from staff members and nearby residents. The footage aired soon after, showing a man who seemed completely unaware of his surroundings or actions. Inside, police recovered a knife, a metal pipe, remnants of ayahuasca, psilocybin mushrooms, San Pedro cactus. Medical examiners confirmed Ivan exhibited signs of acute psychosis, profound disorientation, delusional speech, and extreme agitation. They concluded he had been under the influence of powerful psychoactive substances during the attack. Jose Ordóñez told investigators that the center itself bore no responsibility, insisting, "We didn't give them anything. They took it on their own." His statement sparked outrage among locals. Crowds gathered outside the gates of Centro dos Mundos, demanding its closure. Many believed the tragedy had been inevitable. Too many rituals had been conducted without medical supervision or proper safety protocols. What was marketed as a place of healing had now become the site of one of the most disturbing cases in the region's recent history. After Ivan's arrest, local police in Yurimaguas transferred the case to the regional prosecutor's office in San Martin. The investigation moved quickly. The severity of the crime was undeniable. On August 12, 2024, just 5 days after the incident, the court held a preliminary hearing to determine custody conditions. Ivan was officially charged with committing a deliberate act of extreme violence, resulting in death. During the hearing, Ivan appeared confused and disoriented. He admitted causing Ludmila's death, but insisted he had been expelling a dark spirit from her. His defense argued he had suffered a hallucinogen-induced psychotic episode. After reviewing psychiatric evaluations, the judge ordered that Ivan remain in pre-trial detention for 9 months while awaiting the final verdict. Not long afterward, new and troubling details began to emerge. Reports revealed that Ivan had been receiving supplies, food, cigarettes, and other personal items from individuals associated with the center. This revelation ignited yet another wave of public outrage. Despite this, Jose Ordóñez continued to distance himself from any responsibility, insisting that the tragedy had nothing to do with the center's operations. But journalists soon uncovered testimonies from former participants accusing him of misconduct, manipulation, and negligence. Once those stories aired, local residents renewed their demands for Centro dos Mundos to be shut down entirely. Many began referring to it not as a place of healing, but as a place of death. Ludmila Lazarenko's body was cremated in the city of Tarapoto on August 14, 2024. The ceremony was attended by a close friend from Spain and representatives from the prosecutor's office. Her ashes were later transported to Moscow with assistance from the Russian diplomatic mission. The Lazarenko family demanded justice, filing an official request with Peruvian authorities. To them, the entire tragedy was incomprehensible. A woman who had devoted her life to guiding and healing others was gone, taken by someone she had tried to help. The story quickly spread across international media. Around the world, people began discussing the dangers of unregulated spiritual centers and the uncontrolled use of ayahuasca in Peru. This case became a stark warning, a tragic reminder of how thin the line can be between a quest for spiritual awakening and a plunge into perilous, unmonitored experimentation. Fort Worth, Texas, was a quiet city known for its tree-lined streets and cozy homes. However, in the spring of 2017, that peace was broken. This is where 22-year-old Molly Matheson was starting over. She was bright, full of life, loved her family, and was popular with her friends. Molly rented a small guest house behind a larger house, a peaceful place where she could begin a new chapter. On April 10th, when Molly didn't arrive at work and didn't answer her phone, her mother felt worried. When she opened the door to the house, she was met with a scene that would forever traumatize the Matheson family. The bedroom was in disarray, as if a struggle had occurred. A large mirror lay shattered on the floor. In the bathroom, Molly's body was found, wet, cold, and still. From this seemingly safe neighborhood, a terrifying mystery emerged, setting off a chain of events that exposed a dangerous predator whom the police should have apprehended long ago. Molly Matheson was born on May 18, 1994, the second child in her family. She had an older brother named Nick. Later, her parents adopted 2 boys from Korea, Max and Ben. Molly's older sister naturally became a second mother to the younger siblings, responsible, firm, yet endlessly loving. At the time of Molly's birth, the family lived in Fairfax, Virginia, When she was 3 years old, they moved to Winter Park, Florida. In school, Molly played on the lacrosse team, inspired by her brother's passion for the sport. Beyond athletics, she was deeply involved in the Methodist Church. Faith played a central role in the Matheson household. Every summer, Molly volunteered at Vacation Bible School and joined mission trips. For her, these experiences were not only about religion, but also about forming meaningful connections. She had a warm, magnetic personality, always optimistic, and eager to help others. In 2010, the family moved once more, this time to Texas. Molly was 16 and already dreaming of attending the University of Arkansas. When she eventually went to college, she met her future best friend, Sutton. During her university years, Molly explored new interests, including getting a few small tattoos that she kept secret from her parents. Despite her strong academic performance and potential, Molly made the difficult decision to withdraw from school in 2015 during her senior year. She wanted a break. While she loved her time in Arkansas, she felt the need to return home and start anew. She rented a small house just minutes from her parents' former home, located on the property of a local teacher. Her decision to leave college wasn't spontaneous. She intended to change her major and transfer to a local university to study social sciences. Of course, this required money, so she took a part-time job at a lingerie boutique. By 2017, Molly was 22 years old. She lived independently, handled her own responsibilities, and maintained close communication with her family. Like many young adults, she stayed active on social media, posting photos, updates about her life, and interacting frequently with loved ones. April 9, 2017, was a quiet Sunday. Molly stopped by her parents' house for a short visit. She told them she planned to complete some schoolwork that evening. After chatting with her family, she headed home. Monday, April 10th, began like any other day. Everything seemed normal until 3:40 p.m., when Molly's mother, Tracy, received a call from the manager of the store where Molly worked. Molly's shift started at 1:00 p.m., but she was absent and not answering her phone. This was alarming. Molly was responsible and punctual. She never missed work. At first, her mother tried to stay calm, but when repeated calls went unanswered, she decided to drive to Molly's house. On the way, she tried calling again. Still no answer. She called a neighbor to ask whether Molly's car was in the driveway. The neighbor checked and confirmed it was parked right where it normally would be. Fear began to creep in. Tracy tried to reassure herself, thinking Molly might be unwell, but her instincts told her something was terribly wrong. When she arrived at the house, she rushed to the front door. No one answered her knock, but she discovered the door was unlocked, a detail that frightened her even more. She stepped inside, calling out Molly's name. The living room and guest room looked untouched, but the bedroom was noticeably disordered, as if someone had left in a panic. And on the floor lay a shattered full-length mirror. Tracy's fear deepened the moment she spotted Molly's purse sitting in plain view, containing everything her daughter would never leave behind: her wallet, documents, car keys, cash, and cell phone. Molly simply did not go anywhere without these essentials. That was the moment Tracy's worry shifted into full-blown panic. When she stepped into the bathroom, her world collapsed. Molly was lying on the floor of the shower stall, still dressed in a wet t-shirt, her hair damp and clinging to her face. She wasn't moving. She wasn't responding. Tracy immediately dialed 911. The dispatcher instructed her to administer first aid, but as Tracy pulled her daughter out of the shower, she felt how unnaturally cold Molly's body was. By the time paramedics arrived, Molly's father had also reached the house. After their examination, the medics confirmed the worst. Molly was gone. They delivered the devastating news to her parents as they stood outside, overwhelmed and unable to comprehend what they were hearing. At first, paramedics considered the possibility of end her life. There were several prescription medications on the bathroom counter, enough to raise initial suspicion. But her family immediately rejected that theory. Molly had no illnesses, no addictions, no history of emotional instability. Nothing about this made sense. The next person to learn the truth was Molly's best friend, Sutton. She had been trying to reach Molly since morning, but her calls went unanswered. Late that afternoon, she received a short text message from an unknown number, offering condolences. Confused and terrified, Sutton rushed to Molly's street, only to find it crowded with police vehicles, paramedics, and grieving family members. Neighbors knew Molly lived alone, and whispers quickly spread. Meanwhile, the police conducted a search of the house. Nothing seemed out of place. No forced entry, no broken windows, no signs of struggle, no blood. Electronics and valuables remained untouched, aside from the unlocked door, which felt odd but not definitive. Nothing suggested an attack. A forensic sweep turned up no foreign fingerprints and no damaged property. Everything appeared normal, until detectives opened the washing machine. Inside was a heap of soaking wet laundry, clearly washed after Molly had died. The timing made no sense. More disturbing was the mixture of items. Molly's underwear, a pair of men's underwear she did not own, her shorts, and bedding that had been stripped selectively from her bed. Detectives immediately recognized what it meant. Someone had washed evidence. They also concluded that Molly had been placed in the shower and rinsed under running water to erase trace evidence, explaining her wet clothing and hair. When they examined her face more closely, they saw faint red petechiae around her eyes. Tiny burst blood vessels, classic signs of strangulation. With these findings, investigators formally declared the property a homicide scene. They sealed the guest house, posted an officer outside overnight, and waited for full forensic teams to arrive in the morning. The autopsy confirmed the detectives' suspicions. Molly had died from manual strangulation. She also suffered blunt force trauma to the head, likely delivered from behind, which explained the absence of defensive wounds. She never had a chance to fight back. Given that Molly's lower body had been left exposed, abuse assault was strongly suspected. Forensic samples were collected immediately in hopes of obtaining a usable DNA profile. On April 11, 2017, the Matheson family was informed that their daughter had been murdered. They were called to the police station, where detectives asked them to recount everything they knew about Molly's recent activities, friendships, relationships, and behavior. The investigation has officially been classified as a murder case. The news of Molly's death sent a shockwave through everyone who knew her. Within hours, her friends gathered online, creating a private social media group dedicated to discussing what might have happened. They weren't just exchanging theories. They compiled a detailed list of every friend, acquaintance, classmate, and co-worker Molly had interacted with in recent months. Within just a couple of days, while detectives were still checking basic leads, her friends gave police their first solid name: David Walton. He was someone Molly had been seeing casually for the past few months. They had known each other since school and had recently reconnected. Their first in-person meeting had taken place only a few days before her death. When detectives questioned David, he admitted he knew Molly but insisted they were just friends. He claimed they hadn't planned to pursue a relationship and were casually talking. He acknowledged they had been intimate once, but said it meant nothing. David confirmed he spent April 9th with her, but denied any role in her assault or murder. According to him, they ran into each other by chance that morning at a grocery store, played a few rounds of pool, and then parted ways. David also suggested another person detectives should consider. According to him, Molly had mentioned a man from Arkansas, Ryan, someone she knew from college, who, David believed, had unresolved romantic feelings for her. When detectives contacted Ryan by phone and asked him to come in, the conversation started smoothly until they informed him of Molly's death. His tone shifted instantly. He tried to sound calm, almost detached. Ryan finally agreed to speak with investigators, but only by phone. He admitted he and Molly had talked occasionally, but insisted their relationship meant nothing. He confirmed he had spoken with her on the morning of her death, but denied seeing her recently. To confirm any of these stories, detectives needed Molly's phone. It was soon located under a mattress at the house she rented. Her family found this deeply troubling. She might have sensed danger and tucked the phone away so she could secretly call for help. But she never got the chance. Once investigators accessed the device, the picture became clearer. On the night of April 9th, Molly had been texting with someone whose number wasn't saved in her contacts. Despite that, the tone made it obvious she knew him well. She even invited him to her home. They discussed the timing, agreeing he would arrive sometime between 10:30 a.m. and 11 o'clock p.m. At 11:37 p.m., Molly was still alive. She replied to a friend on social media, making plans to meet later that week. Then, at 12:59 a.m., she received a text message from an unknown number. Molly never opened it. Based on the digital timeline, detectives concluded Molly likely died sometime between 11:37 p.m. and 12:59 a.m. Now it was time to dig deeper. When investigators traced the unknown number from Molly's phone, they quickly confirmed that it belonged neither to Ryan nor to David. GPS checks also showed that neither was connected. Their phones were not near Molly's house on the night she was murdered. Running the mystery number through law enforcement databases produced a new name: 23-year-old Reginald Kimbrough. Up to that point, his name hadn't surfaced once. But Molly's friends immediately recognized him. Reginald was someone Molly had met on Tinder during her college years in Arkansas. He had graduated from Plain High School in 2011 and enlisted in the military. He claimed to have attended university, but investigators later confirmed that was untrue. Reginald simply spent a great deal of time on campus because he had close friends there, including his former high school classmate, as well as several girlfriends. One of these girlfriends was Megan, Molly's college roommate. Through Megan, Reginald became acquainted with Molly, and every time he visited campus, he spent time with her. According to Megan, their relationship escalated quickly. They even lived together for a short period before drifting apart. By 2015, they had completely cut contact. Megan and Molly also grew apart after graduation. Eventually, Megan began dating Reginald herself. Megan told detectives that Reginald initially appeared charming and considerate, but quickly revealed his manipulative, short-tempered, and controlling nature. With these revelations, suspicion around Reginald intensified. He was quickly located and voluntarily came to the police station on April 14, 2017. During the interview, Reginald admitted he and Molly had been involved for a time. He said their relationship ended permanently after several arguments. According to him, he and Molly had recently resumed texting, which led to a meetup on April 9th. He claimed he arrived around 10:30 p.m. They talked, watched TV, had a drink, and caught up on each other's lives. He said he kissed her. She declined intimacy, so he left around 12:30 a.m. Throughout the interview, he appeared unconcerned and even emotionally detached. saying he was shocked to hear she had died. But the timeline was troubling. Molly died shortly after he claimed to have left. Reginald cooperated at first, voluntarily giving detectives his DNA and his cell phone for examination. However, CCTV footage soon exposed a crucial lie. Cameras showed Reginald leaving Molly's home at about 2:00 a.m., not 12:30 a.m., as he claimed. When confronted about this discrepancy, Reginald became irritable, insisting that a difference of a few minutes was insignificant. The tone in the room shifted instantly. Reginald became defensive, refused a polygraph test, and stopped answering questions. Detectives left him alone in the interrogation room to observe his behavior, but he did nothing revealing. After his phone was returned, he walked out. At that point, there was still no physical evidence tying him to the crime, but now he was their leading suspect. Next, investigators turned to DNA comparison. They would test Reginald's profile against the biological material recovered from Molly's body. Meanwhile, a deeper background check revealed an alarming incident from 2014 involving a young woman named Katie Coates. Detectives contacted her immediately. Katie reported that she had met Reginald on a beach. At first, he behaved like a perfect gentleman, until he suddenly turned violent. She said he abused her, choked her, nearly killing her. She survived and reported the assault to police. Reginald was arrested, but he claimed the encounter was consensual and that Katie was simply trying to avoid feeling guilty for cheating on her boyfriend. Because it lacked clear corroboration, the case quietly faded, and no charges were filed. To detectives, this history painted a chilling pattern, one that made Reginald look more dangerous. It later emerged that this was not the first violent incident involving Reginald. His earliest known assault dated back to 2012 in his hometown of Plain, Texas. The victim, Melissa Winton, was a high school senior at the time. She had met Reginald by chance, and they exchanged numbers almost immediately. Shortly afterward, he invited her over, but instead of letting her in through the door, he insisted she climb through his window. Melissa agreed, unaware of the danger, and soon became the victim of his attack. During the investigation, Reginald agreed to a polygraph test and then pressured Melissa into dropping the charges. No prosecution followed. Although neither case resulted in convictions, the women's accounts were disturbingly similar, and their stories echoed the circumstances surrounding Molly's death. With only circumstantial evidence against Reginald so far, investigators returned to one overlooked detail: the washing machine. When officers first entered Molly's home, the wash cycle had just finished. Detectives began analyzing the time window, hoping to determine exactly when it had been running. Molly's rental home had been fitted with a smart meter, a device that recorded electricity consumption in 15-minute intervals. When detectives pulled the data, they noticed a dramatic spike at 1:45 a.m. Testing an identical model washing machine confirmed their belief. The wash cycle had been running at the exact time. Reginald was still inside the home. It was a significant, incriminating clue, but even with this new evidence, it was still not enough to make an arrest. And detectives feared time was running out, that Reginald might strike again. They were right. On April 14, 2017, another woman from Plain, Texas, 36-year-old Megan Gettram, went missing. She failed to show up for her brother's birthday celebration, something her family knew she would never skip. When she didn't come to work the next day, alarm turned into panic. Her brother searched her house, but found nothing. A full-scale search quickly began. Soon after, the body of an unidentified woman was discovered in a lake roughly 50 kilometers from Plain. She wore clothing consistent with Megan's last known outfit, The autopsy revealed blunt force trauma to the head and signs of compression on the face and neck. She had been brutally assaulted and abused. Detectives canvassing Megan's neighborhood found a group of teenagers who had seen a young black man, about 20 years old, lingering near her home the evening she vanished. Their description matched Reginald. Witnesses also reported seeing a blue Buick circling the area repeatedly, the same model as Reginald's car. Investigators working on Megan's case contacted the team investigating Molly's murder. Once they compared notes, the connection became unmistakable. Reginald Kimbrough was now the prime suspect in 2 homicides. A warrant for his arrest was issued on April 26, 2017. He was found at his father's home in Plain and taken into custody under a $500,000 bond. When forensic testing was completed, the results were definitive. Reginald's DNA was found on both Megan and Molly. In June 2017, he was also formally charged in the assault of Katie Coates. And then, more reports surfaced. Additional women came forward, revealing they too had been assaulted by Reginald. Since 2014, there had been at least 5 such cases. Detectives were certain that the true number of victims was even higher. Many attacks had likely never been reported. By early 2018, Reginald faced 2 capital murder charges, along with dozens of lesser counts. The surviving victims are ready to testify against him. In the year after losing their daughter, Molly's family turned their grief into action. They launched several initiatives supporting survivors of abuse violence, including 3 community programs dedicated to helping women rebuild their lives. They also discussed creating a university scholarship for students affected by abuse. 2 years after Molly's death, her mother, Tracy, approached Texas lawmakers with a crucial question: how can we prevent this from happening again? Her relentless efforts ultimately led to the creation of Molly's Law, legislation designed to strengthen the identification of serial offenders and improve the systems meant to protect victims of abusive violence. Due to social distancing measures, Reginald Kimbrough finally pleaded guilty to manslaughter on March 18, 2022. This allowed him to avoid capital punishment. Instead, he received multiple life sentences without parole. Detectives still believe he has many more victims. Molly's Law is now fully active. In June 2020, law enforcement seized a phone while investigating a criminal group in Tyler, Texas. The phone contained videos showing abuse. Investigators used a state database and contacted FBI agents to identify the person in the videos. This investigation led to the first arrest made possible by Molly's Law. J.C. Day was arrested and found guilty of the crime.